please stand. Mona will carry out a blessing, and that'll be followed by Reverend Stephen Black, who will do a reading. And then following the reading and the blessing, I'll be handing over to the Deputy Mayor, who will pay our respects to the Honourable Korowetiri as well. So, Mona, over to you.
Morena tātou i te whare, tuatahi, ana ka tika Richard, me whai whakaaro tātou ki tō tātou rangatira kia koro, ko ia te tangata Māori, e kōkiri ana i ngā kaupapa, hei oranga mō ngā tangata katoa, nō reira, e te rangatira takoto mai, takoto mai, takoto mai, takoto mai i tō tūranga, kei tūranga waiwai. Me te mea hoki tō tātou tōnga whakairo kia inia te wiata, e takoto ana i te taho koro ki tūranga waiwai marae, ko inia te tangata i whakapai hia te waka kei tō tātou whare taonga, kua mōhio a Lance. Hoi anō nei rā te whakaaro kia inia me tōna whānau. Hoi anō i te whare kei anō i tātou. E pai te matua nei rā mātou e whakamoimuti e whakawhetai atu nei ki a koe i tēnei ata. Kia whakapiri mai, kia whakatata mai koe ki a mātou i roto i tēnei rā. Kia whakatata mai koe ki ngā memango te kaunihira, kia whakatata mai koe ki tō mātou koromatua ki a anaru. Ia rātou e whiri i ngā kaupapa o te rangi nei. Nō reire e pā te matua, kia korowaitia koe i a rātou katoa i roto i te aroha, kia māhia mai te kite i ngā kaupapa me te whakatau atu i ngā kaupapa kua tai ki o rātou nei aroaro. Nō reire e pā te matua, mau anō hei manaki, mau anō hei tiaki e a rātou, a wairua, a tinana, a hinengaro, kia tutuki pai ngā mahi o te rangi nei. Nā, ko koe te atua ka haore ki atu. Nō reire pā te matua tēnei tā mātou nei inoi ki a koe i tēnei ata, i roto i tēnei taone nui, e arohatia nei e tātou, ko kirikiri roa. I roto i te ingoa tautama i Ukraiti. Āmen.
Ata Marie and good morning. The reading set aside by the Church for today is from the Gospel of Luke, and the context seems strangely relevant. One day, Jesus told his disciples a story to illustrate their need for constant prayer and to show them that they must never give up. There was a judge in a certain city, he said, who was a godless man with great contempt for everyone. A widow of that city came to him repeatedly, appealing for justice against someone who had harmed her. The judge ignored her for a while, but eventually she wore him out. I fear neither God nor man, he said to himself, but this woman is driving me crazy. I'm going to see that she gets justice, because she is wearing me out with her constant requests. So I say to you all, be persistent in your efforts to get justice and remain hopeful. And may God grant you wisdom as you determine when to drive someone crazy and when to leave well alone. Amen.
Which version was that?
Yeah. So I'll ask everyone to remain standing. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. As you'll be aware,
we have noted the very sad passing of the Honourable Korowetiri, and no tribute that I make on behalf of Council can match, I think, some of the very beautiful words that have been happening at Tūranga Waiwai this week. I just want to say, even as a very young man, I remember his ability as a young chap from Tikawiti was recognised as a potential candidate in the 60s by the late Prime Minister, the Norman Kirk, and of course Korowetiri first stood for Western Maori when he was 34, and a number of Labour leaders at the time saw his huge potential. I just want to acknowledge on behalf of all his huge service to Tainui, Māoridom and Aotearoa New Zealand as a whole. As a person, I found him at ease with heads of states around the cabinet table, but he also would be occasionally spotted at the base at a cafe place, and he would beckon you over with a "Hey Marty, hey Dave," glint in his eye, and incredibly humorous, incredibly approachable and incredibly wise. Of course, that twinkle in the eye perhaps hid his passionate belief in preserving and promoting our official language, Maori, in wanting to get a better deal for young people of all races, all backgrounds in terms of social and economic development. He served our city and Waikato region, Tainui, as one of its members of parliament for 27 years or so. And in recognition of that service to our city and our region and his country, obviously we will be flying our flag tomorrow at half-mast as a small token of our recognition of his great service. Go well, Koru.
Thank you, everyone. Please be seated.
So I'll open the council meeting on the 26th of June 2018. It's 9:37 a.m. I'll call for apologies. I have an apology from the Deputy Mayor and Councillor Cusson for early departure. Any other apologies? Okay, moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Dave. All those for, any against? Carried. Confirmation of agenda, I'll hand over to the Democracy Manager.
Kia ora tātou. This morning confirmation of the agenda is relatively simple. Just to ask that the agenda that you have be confirmed, noting that debate is proposed as 2 minutes with a 1 minute extension if required. Thank you, Mayor.
Moved by Councillor.
A question on the confirmation of the agenda. I have an email dated the 5th of June which stated that the Audit New Zealand report, which was investigating property purchases in Victoria Street and possible collusion, was to be tabled at this meeting.
Excuse me. This isn't on the agenda. It's not for discussion today.
I'm asking Mayor Andrew why I was informed on the 5th of June that it would be on today's meeting, and it is not.
I'm unaware of why it's not on. I'm unaware of why you were told it would be on the meeting today.
Well, I've got an email that says it is going to be considered.
It didn't make it onto the agenda, Councillor. So that's the end of that
Okay, so just in terms of an update, when can we expect to receive the Audit New Zealand report, having regard to the fact that on Thursday, we are being asked to potentially commit up to $7 million to the very project that this Audit New Zealand report has considered?
I have no idea. It's in the hands of Audit New Zealand, and it would be inappropriate to meddle with their process or to pressure them to release it early. So,
has Audit New Zealand indicated to you when the report is likely to be, or this part of the report is likely to be finalised?
No, they haven't. And as I've said, it's not on the agenda today. It was never proposed to go on the agenda from my knowledge. If somebody has sent you an email to say otherwise, you need to take that up with that person.
Are you concerned at the delays?
Excuse me, the matter's over. It's not on the agenda. So do we have a mover? Councillor Gary, seconded by Councillor Jeff. All those for? Any against? Could you please call the vote?
Carried, one dissenting.
Thank you. Declarations of interest.
Yes, Mayor Andrew. I have a conflict on item 9, but I intend to remain in the chamber, but will not participate in the discussion or vote.
Thank you. That's noted. Okay, so we're now moving on to the public forum. Is there anybody? Okay, so there's no one speaking in a public forum. Don't need a mover or a seconder for that, do I? Okay, so confirmation of council open minutes.
Something on that?
Yes.
I apologise to Democracy for not bringing it to you offline, but I was reading this on a plane last night, just about breaking the weight limit with the agenda. There's an item there regards the gambling venue policy. I was actually present for the vote, but am not recorded in the vote. I didn't leave until later in the meeting, and that's correctly noted. So this is item 12 on page 10. Could I please get it recorded the way I voted, because I'm just absent from there, or not even noted as absent?
Yes is the short answer, Councillor Bunting. The slightly longer answer is we'll just have to refer back to the system, because the system records votes for and against.
Yeah,
so if
which is
there's
really
something
strange,
that doesn't correlate with you being in the chamber, we'll investigate. So,
Well, I can tell you
long
I
way
was here. I actually went to YouTube and saw it.
Yeah,
So could we please have it recorded that I was present for the vote and voted the way I did?
absolutely.
Thank you.
Provided you voted,
did,
absolutely, we
definitely.
will be updated. Yes, so
Yeah,
all I'm
yeah.
saying is, we, as a matter of fact and accuracy, need to check our records to ensure that that is the case.
Okay.
And assuming it is exactly as you say, which I have no reason to doubt,
Yeah, of
Councillor
course.
Bunting, the meeting minutes will be updated to reflect that.
Thank you. Happy with
Okay,
that.
thank you.
Okay, moved by Councillor Marks, seconded by Councillor Gary. All those for, any against? Carried. Okay, confirmation of elected member briefing notes. So this is item 6, page 18. I'll move. Seconded by Councillor Jeff. All those for, any against? Carried. Item 7, page 21, confirmation of elected member briefing notes. A move, seconded by Councillor Dave. All those for, any against? Carried. Item 8, page 23, confirmation of elected member briefing notes. Open, 12th of June 2018. Councillor Gary. Moved by Councillor Gary, seconded by Councillor Ryan. All those for, any against? Carried. Okay, we're now moving to item 9.
Can I just ask a matter of process? So we're not in a formal hearing, are we? So is this a type of public forum that we'll be hearing? Just trying to get some context around.
Yeah, effectively, it's type of public forum.
It's a type of public forum, okay.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
So, yes.
Point, will we have the opportunity to question the speakers? And is there a time limit on that, or is the 10 minutes, for instance, include the speakers and the questions, just so we know?
The time allocated is inclusive of questions, so 10 minutes, you get whatever leftover time in there, 10 minutes for the questions.
Thanks.
So I'll just, to introduce this item while the Democracy Manager is sorting this out. So the matter being considered this morning is a special housing area application. While there is a broader vision for the site, the decision of Council today is simply whether or not to recommend Te Awa Lake's application for residential housing development via an SHA to the Minister. Speakers are requested to stay on topic of the SHA only when talking about the site, the area and any other impact, positive or negative, that they cover. I would also ask elected members to do the same during question time. We have a lot to get through today, so I will bring you back on topic if anybody strays away from the core reason for this, which is special housing area or not. So if it gets off subject at all, either by the speaker or on questions, I will be dragging it back to what we're here to talk about today.
Recommendation, is it just, I don't know what D...
What page are you on?
So on page 3 of your of our agendas, the staff recommendation, which is paragraph 3, item or D in that, appears to me just to echo or just to replicate what is mentioned in C. I just want to know what it adds to the recommendation. I can't see that it's any different than what is recommended in C.
Councillor, it just means that those...
Where am I looking?
Jen, behind you.
Oh.
The specific criteria that you vote on today in C becomes part of the recommendation to the Minister. So the recommendation goes with those criteria.
Is that not included in C Romans 1, 2 and 3? Is that?
C is what the criteria is.
Yeah.
D says that when the recommendation goes, it goes with those criteria.
Okay, so it does mean something.
It does mean
add something to what we need. That we need D, do we?
We do.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so we're moving now into public forum. So the first speaker is the Ministry of Education.
Morning, I'm Alison Harold, Manager of Education.
Alison, just before we start, I'll let you introduce yourselves. On the bottom right-hand corner is 10 minutes counting down.
Great.
At 9 minutes, a bell will ring, just indicating you have 1 minute left. And at 10 minutes, you do need to be finished, and that includes questions.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, my name's Alison Harold. I'm Manager of Education at the Ministry of Education with responsibility for network. And my colleague here is Sharon Walker, who is Manager for Education Infrastructure Services, so she manages the property requirements. The Ministry supports Hamilton City Council and its plan to grow the population over the next 10 years. And we do appreciate the engagement that we've had to date from the planning team around recent developments in Hamilton City. We would like to continue this going forward so that we can react as quickly as possible to any new developments and changes. One of the challenges we face is that we have long lead-in times for things. So the current capacity of the primary school network across the city is stretched, and we expect this to progress into the secondary school network by 2022. The proposed Te Awa Lakes development is adjacent to Horatu School. The school itself is over 100 years old, and it's on a just over 2 hectare site. The school has 7 ministry-owned teaching spaces. We anticipate that the new development would feed into this school rather than a new school being built. We estimate that the development of 1,000 dwellings at Te Awa Lakes could result in an additional 300 students, requiring at least 13 additional classrooms. A higher dwelling yield would obviously yield more students and the need for more classrooms. For us, the physical limitations of the site mean that significant infrastructure work would be required to enable the site to cater for this type of increase. And current demand right across the country for role growth classrooms is unprecedented. So all requests must be processed against a national prioritisation list. We're also tied to an annual budget cycle for funding, which means, and delivery timeframes for new classrooms at the moment are 2 years or longer. So that becomes a challenge for us in terms of lead-in time. The school itself is currently operating an enrolment scheme in order to manage its role. It's above capacity, but some of that are students they've voluntarily taken. It will take about 6 years for the school to manage those students out and get in strict management before those numbers can be managed down. This is unlikely to be popular with the families of current students who are primarily from Ngaruawahia, and it also means there is a real risk of overcrowding at the school in the short term. So for us, primarily, without a sufficient lead-in time, that is, should development begin in the next 12 to 24 months, the Ministry is unlikely to be able to deliver adequate schooling provision. Noting this is not specific for Horatiu, but rather it's an issue for any development across the city where local capacity does not exist. It does. Any questions?
So, Councillor Dave.
Thanks very much. So are you telling us that because children go from Ngaruawahia and other a lot further afield districts to Horatiu School, that it wouldn't be popular, I think was the word you used, with those parents for kids that might live in this new estate 400 metres away as the crow flies? Is that the message you're sending?
They will see that as the new estate pushing them out, but in actual fact, we've already put pressure on the school to manage down their numbers. So that's just, it's more of a side issue, but it is one of the risks that
there are
could
4
surface.
primary schools in Ngaruawahia, aren't there?
Yes.
Yep. So there is a sort of a flight from Ngaruawahia to Horatiu, is there, with primary school kids at the moment?
There is some flight, yes.
Yeah. So is that something that the Ministry should be managing separately with the schools involved rather than...
Absolutely, and we are working on that at the moment.
So it's not, it wouldn't be appropriate then to visit that problem on Horatiu School alone?
No.
Okay. When a school is about 400 metres and there's a good walking and cycling connection to it between this area, proposed area, and the school, is it not appropriate to encourage growth of schools and to plan for it?
Absolutely, but it comes back, for us, it's about the lead-in time.
Okay, and there's 1,000 lots proposed, or separate dwelling unit lot, whatever the terminology is for this. They're not all going to come on stream at once, are they?
No, but at the moment, our point is, if houses are built in the next 2 years, say, we are struggling to find classrooms to put on site as quickly as that.
Is that a problem for this particular locality, or is it a nationwide problem that the Ministry of Education has not been able to keep up with growth for the last 2 decades in the Upper North Island?
It's particularly, it is a nationwide problem, and particularly we're feeling in the Waikato, where we have had significant growth. We're one of the fastest, as you know, one of the fastest growing areas outside of Auckland.
Can I speak to that? I would just like to comment that actually we are talking about this particular situation. So what we're highlighting to you is that we have a current issue with capacity at the school. We are managing it, but we just are highlighting that we cannot just turn around and deliver classrooms in a very short time frame. And I think that's the key issue, is in regards to our ability to meet any requirements in that area in a short time
Thanks,
frame.
that was already said by the previous speaker, thanks.
Councillor, just last question, please, because of the sake of time, there's a list of people waiting.
Okay, the 2-year lead time for building a school, how many children do you expect to be living in Te Awa Lakes within 2 years if you started now? You've got a 2-year lead time for new classrooms.
We can't start now. It's budget dependent, and I can tell you that budget 18 has already been spent. So the earliest we would get classrooms allocated would be from budget 19. So we're really looking at 2 to 3 years.
So there's no way of coping with Waikato or Hamilton's growth in 2 years, no matter where it is?
No, we are likely to get some classrooms, but for new developments, we will be struggling.
Okay, we have 4 more people who want to ask questions. There's 3 minutes left, so Deputy Mayor, I'm sorry, you're going to have to miss out unless we get through quicker. So 1 minute maximum, please, Councillor Mark.
I just want to dig into a little bit of your rationale on the 13 classrooms for 300 extra children. That's
Yeah.
1 per 23 kids.
Yes.
Is that right? Now, is Horatu an innovative learning space, or is it a single cell?
At the moment, it's single cell.
Does it have plans to go innovative learning space, and would that affect the amount of builds? Because effectively you have to build half as many classrooms with that.
The pedagogy of the school is entirely up to the Board of Trustees.
Right.
So at this point, we can't answer 100% in regards to what their long-term view is. In regards to the number of children that you would still get into that space, you know, obviously, regardless of how they're teaching, we still try to have a student-teacher ratio.
Right,
Yeah.
meterage, as it
Yeah.
were, for each kid. Okay.
Okay, Marco,
No.
sorry, your minute's up.
It was a good minute though, wasn't it?
It was great.
Thanks.
We enjoyed it, thank you.
Councillor Paula?
Thank you. Good morning. I'm interested in the two things, the physical limitations of the site and the fact that you said this problem is not specific to Horatu. So can you just tell me a little bit more about that, please?
As you said, the site is just over 2 hectares, and so some of it becomes an issue of whether we can fit that number of classrooms on the site, or whether we would need to purchase additional land. Some of that would take some master planning kind of approach. Maybe we can do it if we use 2-storey blocks. Sorry, what was the other question?
Oh, and the other question was, you said this is not specific to Horatu, so you're suggesting that...
So we're saying any, you know...
Just in the new growth areas?
Any of the new growth areas that we know Hamilton City is planning for.
And does that also put pressure on existing schools where there's infill development also?
Absolutely.
It does? Okay, thank you.
Councillor Jones?
Thank you, Mayor Andrew. Thank you for its submission. With people taking their kids to certain different places of, you know, they're not restricted into areas as such, is there capacity for students at the likes of Puketi School and St Peter Chanel, which are fairly close to where Te Awa Lakes are at the moment? Take into account that you're not going to have 300 to 400.
No, we are hoping that by the end of the year, almost every single school in Hamilton City will have an enrolment scheme to ensure that local kids can attend local schools, and that's what I mean by the pressure on our the education network as a whole in Hamilton City is intense. We have very few schools with surplus capacity.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor, you have 18 seconds.
We have Auckland of a multitude of new housing developments where the government is showing strong leadership, as they are in this city. How does that apply to Auckland? I mean, because if, with respect, you're saying slow down housing developments, surely there's a national issue of really high-level provision and planning, not just for Hamilton.
We absolutely agree, and we're doing our very best to lobby with our National Office colleagues.
Okay.
But it's a minister's decision at the end of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Okay, Habitat for Humanity. Good morning, Nick. You have 10 minutes. Your time's on the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. A bell will ring at 9 minutes.
Sure.
And that includes question times.
Okay.
So welcome.
Thank
Start
you.
when you're ready.
Habitat for Humanity is here today to support the Te Awa Lakes development being approved under the SHA policy and recommended to the Minister. Master planning gives effect to a building of not just homes but a community. The effect of having a range of amenities developed alongside this housing subdivision make a very desirable place to live. We believe this location is well suited to a residential development, far more so than its industrial designation at present. This is due to its proximity to the river, the cycle trails and other things that create a social perspective for that development. We believe that it would in fact make a very positive gateway to Hamilton City from the north. Hamilton has a significant housing shortage. The residential component of this plan change is a much needed addition to housing in Hamilton while other growth cells get underway. Affordability in Hamilton is poor. As at June 20th, the median house price in Hamilton was $542,000 and the median household income of $85,000, making a multiple of 6.24, which is far in excess of the international measure of 3 times and in excess of New Zealand's own inflated measure of 5 times. We believe that delivery of a percentage of affordable housing in this subdivision is essential to improving home ownership rates. Having peaked at 74% in 1991, they've been in decline ever since, and we believe there's a strong correlation between this and an increasing wealth gap in our community. We need to do something about this. Councillors will recall that Habitat submitted to the SHA policy and advocated for an affordability criteria at that time. We applaud Te Awa Lakes for their commitment to delivery of 40% affordable in this subdivision. We believe that is an essential part. This is also becoming a focus of government. Kiwi Build, consultation on progressive home ownership and investment in public housing all shape the government's view on the approval of these submissions. We believe this development strongly aligns with the principles of this government's signal direction and will increase affordability in the Hamilton market. The development of a range of housing models will provide housing across the tenure spectrum, including affordable and social provision, and this development, with a mix of tenures and a range of different dwelling types, are, in Habitat's opinion, the best use of the land. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. There are no questions, so thank you for your presentation. Sport Waikato. Welcome, Matthew. You have 10 minutes. The time is on the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. A bell will ring at 9 minutes. Start when you're ready.
Thank you, Mayor Andrew, councillors, staff. Matthew Cooper, the Chief Executive of Sport Waikato. Firstly, I need to declare that I'm no expert on the requirements of SHA, the geotech, etc. But what I am here for is a Hamiltonian and a leader of a regional organisation who, from a conceptual perspective, thinks this is a good idea and one that we support. We're a great believer at Sport Waikato in creating healthy and connected neighbourhoods. In fact, I think we're losing the art of neighbourhoods in its pure sense. This Te Awa Lakes proposed development ticks more boxes, more positive boxes than it does negative. We need more homes in a city that's booming. There is a desire to align the Te Awa Lakes strategy by creating affordable homes. Delivering housing is one thing, but the key difference in this vision is the requirement to, these days, to also create appropriate amenities to support vibrant neighbourhoods. And I can see this coming through in the likes of open spaces, access, and promoting active living options. The northern part of the city with excellent access, the link to the Waikato River and the cycleway are good examples of those access in this particular cell or neighbourhood. Council, thank you very much for the opportunity to show our support to the Te Awa Lakes SHA. Thank you.
Thank you. There are no questions, so thanks for your presentation. Your submission. Okay, Leonard, are you here? Leonard Gardner from Foster's. Waikato Regional Economic Development Agency, Dallas Fisher. Welcome, Dallas. You have 10 minutes. The clock is on the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. The 10 minutes includes questions. A bell will ring at 9 minutes. The clock won't start until you're ready, so just take your time.
Just want to put my presentation up on the screen, please. Kia ora tātou, me, Andrew, councillors, staff, visitors. So I'm here today with my economic development hat on. I'll move through our presentation quite quickly. Oops. So just a slight bit of context. The newly formed Economic Development Agency has 3 objectives: lift economic performance across the region, attract, retain, grow investment, talent, its people and business across the region, and champion one voice. We're currently thinking about the region in this regard, where a number of sub-regions, and right now the Northern Corridor project is leading, which is the orange arrow, a concept of people working together across boundaries and many people, commercial, iwi, all coming to the party to make things happen. We'll note, and this is quite an important thing, that the Area C, which is Thames Valley, those councils met for the first time together last Friday to talk about economic development. So there's a real sense of people starting to work together. Who will and what will the reader support? We're going to support projects and people who have a clear strategy, that support growth, that are credible, that can make things happen. We want to help them provide sustainable business and deliver environmental solutions for the region. We want people that work in partnership and collaborate. We want people that bring resources to the table, and we want people who will work with iwi. Fundamentally, we want economic projects that make the life of our communities better. Perry Group and Te Awa Lakes and the Te Awa Lakes development deliver on all of these fronts. Perry Group is well known in this community and across the Waikato for decades and decades of community good. They're credible, and when you look at the criteria of people that we will support and projects that we will support, Perry and Te Awa Lakes just simply tick every one of those boxes totally. Focusing in on Te Awa Lakes and the SHA. So Te Awa Lakes sits right in the middle of the Northern Corridor strategy. And if we think about the Northern Corridor strategy from the top at Tuakau to Cambridge, the whole concept of the Te Awa Lakes development and what it's going to produce economically is an absolute anchor right at the sort of lower middle part of the corridor. 1,000 houses, somewhere between 500 and 1,000 jobs, significant new tourism industry growth, and significant new commercial opportunities. There aren't many projects in the Waikato that will be game changers and that will contribute the sort of economic grunt that this one will. The SHA itself will deliver over 400 affordable homes. A key issue in the Waikato at the moment is employment and the attraction of new skills. I mentioned the meeting with the three Thames Valley councils earlier. I facilitated that planning session on Friday. Ingham's currently employ 300 people in that area. They're looking for 100 new staff members. They're bussing them in from Tokoroa. One of the issues that they can't get people is because they haven't got housing to actually give the people who want to work in the community around Waharoa, so therefore they can't grow the jobs. In my mind, the overall scale and just sensible stuff happening at Te Awa Lakes delivers not just the jobs, but the ability to build that community and to provide affordable housing for the workers that we need to attract and house in the Waikato. The SHA will facilitate housing, as I've said. It's going to be affordable, amenity that builds community. I totally support previous speakers in the context that we're not just building houses, we're building a community. It's going to be areas for families to grow, for people to interact together. At the Reader, we're working on this scenario, a paradigm shift to a new waka where we all grab a paddle. Te Awa Lakes and the Perry development is an exact example of this. Cross-boundary councils, central government, iwi and the commercial world all working together to make something significant happen. The Reader fully supports Te Awa Lakes and the SHA proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew, and thanks, Dallas. Is there a slight contradiction in that we are talking about taking land which is zoned industrial, business, economic, and converting it into housing? Now, I totally understand that you need staff and staff need houses, but there's a kind of a priority type thing there.
I think we're taking holes in the ground filled with water and turning them into a whole new industry, Gary. You know, the tourism growth in that area is going to be significant.
So just, can I just drag you back there? We're here not to talk about tourism. We're here to talk about this special housing area sign off by the Minister. So we need to keep our questions tight around what we're here for, which is whether we use this as a special housing area or not. So I just want you to keep it tight.
But to be clear, part of that process is a change in the zoning. So are those not appropriate questions? And I'm just challenging, I guess, Dallas rightly is advocating for more business, more growth, and I'm saying, is there a contradiction in that we are taking away business growth, job, land and turning it into residential land?
So it's whether we use this piece of land for an SHA or not. I want to keep it quite tight, okay, through all the questions. So go ahead, but I may stop you again if I feel it's
okay. Well,
if I feel it's drifting too far away from the subject of the SHA for this piece of land.
Okay, one of the issues is there a better use for that land? Is part of one of the reasons one of the things we're going through this process, I assume.
And I think Dallas has answered that, so.
Thank you.
Councillor Jeff.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Andrew. Yeah, Dallas, one of the issues raised has been the issue of the loss of industrial land, the potential loss there. It's zoned industrial, this area, and do we face a shortage of industrial land, partly because of this? What's your response to that?
Listen, I think it's about working with the cross-boundary partners and where you build the industrial land. Huntly, Meremere. I think we're going to bring more industrial land to the party quite quickly. But I think there's some things about Te Awa Lakes, the river, the concept of the gateway, the concept of working closely with iwi, that actually makes it a special opportunity. And we can develop the industrial land quite quickly in other areas.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. So there are no further questions. So thank you, Mr. Fisher. Foster's Construction, Leonard Gardner. Welcome, Leonard. You have 10 minutes. The time is on the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. A bell will ring at 9 minutes, indicating that there's 1 minute left, and the 10 minutes includes questions. You weren't here earlier. I needed to keep quite tight to whether this piece of land is suitable for an SHA, and I just don't want to stray too far away. So, thank you.
Councillors, I'll keep it quite tight. I'm obviously here to speak in support of the Te Awa Lakes SHA project. From my perspective, wearing the Foster Construction hat, but also just as a community member as well. It's located at a gateway to Hamilton, which is going to need significant remediation. And in terms of creating value, what's been proposed, in my opinion, from the Perry submission is significant creation of value and amenity within the Hamilton city boundary. The master planning provides a number of different housing typologies. It activates the Waikato River, provides linkages with the Te Awa Cycleway, potentially the River Explorer, and the roading network in terms of access. It's located next to some pretty significant employers in the area, with AFCO, with Fonterra, and all the employment activities that are happening out at Northgate, which currently don't have much amenity around it to serve. And what has been proposed does provide that community amenity in terms of there's a bit of retail there, but certainly in terms of the housing and the housing types, there's just a good mix of providing that employment, affordable housing for the workers in those areas, as well as some high value and good differentiated housing around the river and the lakes being provided. Probably the biggest thing when I sit there and actually stare at the plans, and I do this quite often for Hamilton, stare at the city, and it's on my wall in my office. I just stand there and stare at the CBD. I stand there and stare at all the land that goes alongside the river, and just work out how can we actually utilise this better and well, not just for the short term in terms of making a profit, but for the long term to actually create a cool place to be, and it's going to attract people. And for me, there's along the other side of the river, on the eastern side of the river, there's a whole lot of housing that actually has captured the value of being alongside the river, and there's some really nice houses along there. And, you know, if I had my way, you'd be able to do that along the western side as well. And I guess Te Awa Lakes is that northern boundary for Hamilton City. But for me, I can see housing going right up to Ngarawahia along the river there. And I'd like to see it coming right down personally. For me, what's been proposed is a really good hub of activity. And as I say, also remediation that needs to happen on the site there. I heard the question earlier about industrial land, and I can either wait till the question's asked or I can sort of preempt it. I guess with the affordable industrial land we've got to consider within the Waikato region, because actually it isn't within Hamilton City boundaries to do any industrial of significance. So any large industrial projects are going to be going out to through Waikato District, like Dallas just mentioned, Hamilton Airport to Waipa District, because of the cost of land and the other charges applied within the Hamilton City boundary, just make it unaffordable. So it will become more of service industrial. Service industrial is maybe much smaller in scale, which means the land available is going to take longer to consume. It's just my opinion. So in terms of is the land better used for industrial, in my opinion, there is going to be enough industrial land that opens up between Te Rapa, moving out there already, and in different areas. So that's it. I support what is happening there. I think there's some real value being created for the city, for potential users of the development. Yep.
Thank you. Councillor Siggy.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much, Leonard, for that. Look, you are in construction and everything, and I'm just wondering, I just read through what's happening here with Te Awa Lakes. Are you in any shape or form worried about having SHA so close to other industrial areas that could cause some noise pollution, whatever?
No, I'm not. Okay. And I guess around the world, it happens all the time.
Absolutely. Thank you.
It happens within Hamilton already.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Leonard. There are no further questions.
Thanks,
Thank you
for
coming in.
Councillors.
Okay, Waikato Regional Council. Welcome. You have 10 minutes. The clock's on the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. A bell will ring at 9 minutes. That includes questions. Can I ask you to introduce yourselves first, please? Thank you. To start when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My name is Mark Tamura, Manager of Integration and Infrastructure at the Waikato Regional Council, and I'm joined by Darian Embling, Team Leader for Biosecurity. The Regional Council supports regional growth, community well-being and initiatives to deliver affordable housing. WRC, in its submission to the SHA in November 2017, expressed its concern about several matters which have also been raised in our submission to the private plan change, in which WRC has also opposed. These are material to the consideration of the SHA under the Hamilton Housing Accord and the Special Housing Area Policy. I will first turn to matters of strategic land use and then later to the site-specific matters. The Special Housing Areas Policy requires you to consider the extent to which the proposed SHA is consistent with Council's strategic land use plans and, if inconsistent, the extent to which it may materially compromise or alter Council's strategic land use plans and the effect of that inconsistency, including any effects on planned and existing infrastructure. Having considered the proposal, WRC remains of the view that the proposal fails these tests. The development is inconsistent with the Hamilton Urban Growth Strategy, the future-proof settlement pattern, the regional policy statement and the district plan. In addition to the matters raised in the officer's report, WRC is of the view that the proposal raises significant questions about, firstly, the functioning and development of Te Rapa-Horotū as a strategic industrial node. Secondly, the risk of diluting demand from other planned residential developments that are consistent with the strategic land use plans and therefore the investment in and timing of infrastructure delivery to enable those developments, including Peacock. Lastly, the ability of local government in the Waikato to provide the certainty and consistency needed for public and private sector investment in infrastructure and land development. We agree with the officer's report, which suggests that a comprehensive future land release program for residential and employment land, taking into account supply and demand in the Greater Hamilton area, should happen before any decision to change the land use at this strategic location. This is the current work underway through the review of Future Proof, which is expected to be concluded by mid-2019 and will be followed by a change to the regional policy statement if required. Now turning to specific matters. Biosecurity. Alligator weed threatens farms, market gardens and urban properties. It clogs waterways and drains, increasing sedimentation and flooding risks. Access to waterways for recreational purposes can be blocked and plants may affect whitebait spawning areas. Alligator weed spreads aggressively from even the smallest fragments. Data from Northland suggests that the cost of not appropriately managing alligator weed could be as much as a 40% loss of production to the Waikato dairy and arable industries if alligator weed is established on pasture, along with significant biodiversity impacts. Te Awa Lakes is the most upstream infestation and has the potential to invade the Waikato River. It is the largest infected terrestrial site in the Waikato and is a restricted place under the Biosecurity Act. Applying similar treatments to what is in place at Rotatuna, where the weed is also present, the Te Awa Lakes development could require for the next 20 to 30 years 1,000 properties to be regularly impacted, regularly inspected by the Regional Council and requiring active ongoing management. Both this and the practical challenges with managing an effective prohibition on the movement of soil and garden waste in a residential context will at best have a significant financial impact on the developer and residents, noting that pest management is funded largely by targeted rate. At worst, it may be unmanageable and result in significant regional economic and biodiversity impacts. Transport. The site's isolation from existing urban areas and single entry and exit means that it would be difficult to provide passenger transport facilities to reflect the Regional Council and City Council's aspirations for growing public transport patronage. Providing a standalone service due to its location is likely to be expensive and will be difficult to justify. Further diverting already established services such as the Huntly service without direct connection would be detrimental to levels of service for existing customers and would be difficult to support. In considering walking and cycling, the SHA is at the extreme northern edge of Hamilton City's territory, with limited walking and cycling opportunities to reach amenities such as supermarkets, secondary education, and other normal facilities anticipated near residential areas. Natural hazards and site remediation. As acknowledged by Foster's, the site would require significant remediation. Geohazards on the site include liquefaction of loose sand and silt, poorly compacted backfill, lateral spread and lateral ground deformations, differential ground settlement and slope instability. The site is also considered to be contaminated. We understand that a dam is also proposed on the site, however we have insufficient information on this aspect of the proposal to provide any further view on this matter. In summary, long-term strategic planning to date has catalysed significant public and private sector investment in infrastructure and land development. This includes the Waikato Expressway, designed expressly to support this strategic industrial node. Deviating materially from these plans without proper strategic assessment risks undermining public and private sector investment certainty and risks reducing confidence that any future such plans will be adhered to. This clearly also includes the Ministry for Education and their ability to plan where schools will go and where capacity will be required. In these cases, as long a lead time as possible is important. HCC has sufficient short, medium and long-term residential development capacity in accordance with the requirements of the National Policy Statement for Urban Development Capacity without the Te Awa Lakes site. Geotechnical considerations for the site and biosecurity risks call into question the ability for the development to provide either the anticipated yield of houses or affordability. They also present significant short and long-term risks and costs. It remains WRC's view that the review of Future Proof, which is expected to be concluded by mid-2019, is the appropriate vehicle to consider land use change on this site. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, half the councillors want to ask questions, Mark, so one question, please. No, one question. So your most important. I'll come back to you, Mark, if there's time at the end.
Okay, all right. Well, in that case, I'll go with the alligator weed one. Wouldn't that be just as disastrous if it was industrial land? Why is it more of an impediment being residential land than it is in its existing term, state?
Thank you, through you, Mr Mayor. The original proposed use of the site was for industrial use, which was a relatively straightforward site remediation. It was effectively a fill and cap with very, very little impermeable surface, and that significantly reduces any initial management of the site. You imagine a residential development progresses in stages over a long period of time. A relatively straightforward fill and cap operation, while it does have significant management implications for the duration of that construction, once completed, the site's sealed, much like any other contaminated site management challenge.
So there's just the fact there's more sections, is that what you're saying?
Yes. You know, the other point here is really the ongoing management requirements. So it's not just during the site development, but once the development has been completed, you remain with quite a significant amount of impervious surface, and that, in fact, that's one of the requirements in order to manage stormwater on the site. The implication of that is that the biosecurity risk remains ongoing. I understand that the Rotatuna site has been under management for 14 years.
Nearly 20.
Nearly 20 years, and it's still not free of the pest.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Paula, one question.
Well, I was going to ask that question, but in respect to geohazards, contaminated land, alligator weed, not the zone which you picked up on Future Proof, those things would be dealt with through the resource consent part of the SHA process anyway, wouldn't they? They would be dealt with in great detail at that time, or not?
Through you, Mr Mayor, they may be. They may be. The question, though, that I think we have in mind is this is an SHA which proposes significant affordability requirements and a necessity to stick with the yield that is approved or recommended through this process. We have significant doubts as to whether the yield of the number of dwellings or the affordability can be met given the development constraints and challenges on the site. These are not cheap.
So that would be another matter.
Sorry, that's your question. One last question, Councillor Gary.
Thank you. You're suggesting that the site might not be economically feasible for housing. We've got a lot of reports here that suggest it might not be economically developable for industrial uses either. Do you have any comment on that? I appreciate these reports are written for the person who pays for them.
Yes. Through you, Mr Mayor, my view is that the relative costs and benefits, the full relevant costs and benefits of a proposal should be considered. Now, they may well be matters that are economic, and the benefits of that may well accrue to the development agency. I think our job here at the Regional Council is to provide yourselves with an understanding of the wider suite of costs and benefits and risks that a proposal comes forward with. I think it remains our view that the potential for the best economic use of the site could be considered through looking at the allocation of land strategically, including at this location. It may be that an alternative use to industry is appropriate site. Whether or not it's an appropriate, this particular proposal is that. I think we have several questions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, gentlemen. Time's up. Okay, AFCO New Zealand and Open Country Dairy. You have 10 minutes. The clock's on the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. The bell will ring at 9 minutes. The 10 minutes includes questions. Welcome. I'll let you introduce yourself.
Okay.
Just start when you're ready. Okay. The clock won't start until you're ready.
Yep. Oh, thank you, Mr Mayor. Now, I know you've had a lot to read, and I'm not intending in this presentation to drill into any of the detail, especially given the limited time, and really it's a high-level overview, trying to touch on some key points that are particularly relevant to both AFCO and to Open Country Dairy. My name is Gary Venus. I'm a planning consultant appearing for AFCO New Zealand Limited and Open Country Dairy Limited, OCD. In relation to the application by Perry Group for the Te Awa Lakes Special Housing Area at Te Rapa North. AFCO has operated a meat processing plant at Horatu for over 100 years. OCD, which is a company with shared ownership to AFCO, is in the final stages of completing a dairy plant adjacent to the AFCO site and sharing the wastewater treatment facilities with AFCO. Both AFCO and OCD lodged submissions in opposition to both the special housing area application and the application for a private plan change. AFCO and OCD did not make their submissions lightly. In fact, this is the first time such submissions have been made in either company's long histories. Both AFCO and OCD opposed the SHA application for reasons relating to loss of future industrial land and reverse sensitivity issues. Both companies acknowledge the importance of providing for residential development at appropriate locations within Hamilton City, but consider that the proposed Te Awa Lakes SHA proposal is in a completely inappropriate location. By way of background, AFCO Horatu is one of the largest employers in the Waikato, paying around $22 million a year in wages and salaries. The operation employs around 500 staff at peak, mainly from the local area. The site uses local and regional contractors with a significant annual contractor spend, most of which is spent locally. AFCO Horatu makes a direct annual contribution of more than $110 million to the Waikato regional economy. Over recent years, the AFCO site has been extensively refurbished to maintain the company's position. Following a major rebuild in 2005, the plant remains one of the most modern beef plants in the Southern Hemisphere and is one of the largest beef slaughter and processing facilities in New Zealand. Present capital value of the AFCO Horatu facility is estimated at more than $130 million. OCD has neared completion of its new dairy factory at Horatu adjacent to the AFCO site. This dairy facility involves investment of $100 to $200 million and employment of around 60 staff and contractors. And as noted above, OCD will be relying on AFCO's wastewater treatment system for treating dairy processing wastewater. AFCO's waste treatment facilities on the northeast side of Great South Road occupy a footprint of around 33 hectares with a boundary less than 500 metres from the SHA boundary. And we've heard reference to the master plan. Well, the boundary comes to within 200 metres of AFCO's wastewater treatment site. So if you're considering the SHA and the master plan, which has been brought up by the speakers, it's around 200 metres away from a significant industrial wastewater treatment facility. AFCO's recently renewed resource consents to authorise ongoing operations. Similarly, OCD's only recently finalised consenting for its new dairy factory. Both companies manage their operations tightly to ensure compatibility with surrounding activities, which in the Te Rapa area are principally industrial. Both companies consider it important for the long-term future of industry in the Te Rapa area that adjacent industrial land uses should be retained to avoid reverse sensitivity effects associated with new incompatible land uses. AFCO and OCD consider that the applicant's proposed SHA is incompatible with existing and likely future industrial activities within and adjacent to the city boundary. As with many large businesses in Hamilton, AFCO and OCD are continually considering future options for expansion and new development. Future enhancements and expansion options will be compromised by adjacent incompatible land use activities which would be created by this SHA. Unlike many large businesses in Hamilton, AFCO and OCD operate facilities in nearby regions where adjacent land uses are more compatible with industrial meat and dairy processing than would be the case under the SHA. If the SHA is approved, AFCO and OCD would need to take future reverse sensitivity issues into consideration in their investment decisions, with potential adverse implications for the economic well-being of Hamilton residents, contractors and the city itself. AFCO and OCD considers that the retention of industrial land on the city boundary is critical to the city's economic progress. I would turn now to some comments on the officer's report. The analysis in the officer's report attached to the agenda is flawed, and both AFCO and OCD submit that you should reject the report's recommendations. Paragraph 17, the report identifies a range of considerations against which the SHA application should be evaluated. including reference to locational considerations which are detailed in para 25. Para 18 of the report states that these locational considerations are partly satisfied. This assessment significantly diminishes the failure of the SHA proposal to align with the locational considerations requirements, with particular reference to the fact that the proposal is not aligned with Council's own strategic land use planning. And I refer to a paragraph there which states that Council staff themselves have concluded the proposal is inconsistent with a wide range of policy issues relating to development, including the regional policy statement, future-proof Hamilton Urban Growth Strategy and the Operative District Plan. AFCO and OCD agree with the staff's conclusion in this regard, position which was shared by many submitters on the plan change application. Officer's report also notes that the proposal would alter the Council's strategic land use planning as the site is located in an area that has been identified for long-term employment use for the last 10 years as outlined in the Hamilton Urban Growth Strategy. And again, the companies agree with this. A number of paragraphs 37 to 40 of the Officer's report also highlight areas where the proposed SHA is inconsistent with your own policy positions. And these are your council staff saying this. So I think you should really take note of what's in their report and those particular matters. However, the author of the report discounts these significant flaws by stating that residential development at the site will reflect broad land use patterns of Hamilton, where high-value riverside sites are primarily used for residential open spaces. In simple terms, the report's author has concluded that all the strategic considerations relating to the site have no merit because, in his opinion, the land would have a higher value as residential or open space. With respect, these complex planning matters should be determined in a transparent planning process rather than in a non-contestable SHA application procedure. And I note that AFCO and OCD are effectively locked out from participation in this process because they don't own land which adjoins the site. And that's the case with most of the speakers. The officer's report also refers to the future industrial land, future use of industrial land is unclear and uncertain over the short to medium term, but it fails to recognise that the reason for the zoning in the first place was to provide for long-term strategic provision of industrial land. Again, this is a matter for consideration in a proper planning process, not an informal ad hoc session such as we're having now. These are important matters, and I've only got 1 minute 40 seconds to continue with the rest of these are really important issues to be addressed. Finally, the officer's report concludes at para 62 and 63 that turning this prime riverside site into a housing area would be the largest waterside development in the city's recent history. That sounds like it's straight from a developer's brochure. This statement indicates an intention to change the zoning of the area and open up high-value prime riverside rental properties. And surely this doesn't reflect the real purpose of an SHA, which should be to address housing shortfalls. And in this regard, there is enough residential land to cater for Hamilton's population growth out to 2035 without relying on the Te Awa Lakes area. And I refer you there to a report that Fonterra had prepared in relation to the plan change application. There is no pressing justification for the SHA in Te Awa Lakes area. If the applicant wants to change the zoning from industrial to residential, the correct process is to change the district plan rather than covertly change the land use via the SHA process. I'll stop now. I've a couple of paragraphs of conclusion, but I'll stop now.
That use of the word covert, I think, is completely out of order when it's a legal policy that we're following and a legal law provided by both of the last governments. I don't think it's in order for a submitter to talk about something being covert.
Okay, I'm not going to rule on that. It's your presentation, but I am going to let you continue past your 10 minutes because you're presenting on behalf of two different organisations. So you're presenting for both Open Country and AFCO. So it's up to you how you use the rest of your time. There are questions here. So I will be taking those questions so I am allowing you to go further because of the unusual position of you presenting for the two.
I believe, Mr Mayor, that you're required to rule on a point of order under the standing orders.
No, I'm not going to rule on that.
Well, could you ask Democracy Manager, thanks, whether that's a requirement under standing orders?
Is poetic licence in there?
Point of order is that the use of the word covert, in fact, you're not the chair. If the Mayor wants me to explain further, I will.
Look, I'm comfortable that it's, the presentation is being made to us. There will be time for questions later, so we'll give you a chance to ask a question. So how do you want to wrap up there and take questions?
Yeah, I'll wrap up there and take questions. Yeah.
Do you want to, have you got a
Well, no, just in conclusion, I guess just very briefly touch on the concluding points. AFCO and Open Country Dairy consider the application should be rejected as it will bring about loss of important future industrial land in the area and will potentially result in unacceptable reverse sensitivity issues. These factors will all contribute to a potential risk that companies such as AFCO and OCD will look elsewhere for future expansion requirements with potential for associated long-term loss of employment and economic opportunities for the city. The officer's report presents a flawed analysis of the underpinning issues which relate to strategic planning for the city's future. AFCO's and OCD's position is that the appropriate forum for considering these issues is a transparent RMA plan change process rather than this SHA process. AFCO and OCD submit that you should reject the recommendations set out in the officer's report and that you should defer any decision on the SHA until after the plan change process has been completed. Thank you.
Councillor Angela.
Thank you, Gary, for presenting to us today. Just a very quick question. You talked about the inability, should the special housing area go ahead to for future expansion for AFCO. Do you have any concrete plans in the future to expand?
Well, as I mentioned in my submission, both companies are constantly looking at opportunities. And, you know, I mean, at the moment there are no specific applications or proposals for expansion, but that doesn't mean there aren't any in the longer term. And you just wrapped up in your final comment, Gary, around that possibly you would have to look elsewhere should the special housing area go ahead. Would that include, that wouldn't include, I'm assuming, picking up AFCO and moving the whole operation somewhere, but it would be a split of It would be where, yeah, exactly, yeah. And it would be a factor in any investment decision relating to either operation.
Okay, yep. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thanks, Gary, for having 2 R's in your name. Well done. So rare these days, isn't it? Look, thank you very much for your presentation. A key issue, I think, of what you're saying is the reverse sensitivity. Is there any mitigation that would comfort yourselves and Open Dairy?
Yeah, the mitigation would be retain the industrial area as a boundary. The issue with reverse sensitivity is that, in effect, from AFCO's point of view, it's got a consented wastewater treatment facility involving a series of treatment ponds. From time to time, things go wrong because they're biological processes. So there is a need for that buffer or separation capacity. And from a reverse sensitivity point of view, putting a large number of houses in relatively close proximity it doesn't make sense from that point of view.
So you can't see any building a wall or it's going to be bloody difficult to get there, right?
Well, the issue for AFCO is odours.
Could you please reframe your language?
Reframe
your language.
Yeah, any wall wouldn't prevent issues with odours. You know, and that's the particular
there's noise,
issue.
There's odours. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
So just before we go any further, on the word covert, it is not clearly using a piece of legislation which is put in place by central government to be used by councillors is not covert. So I'll rule in favour of the accuracy of what they've asked me to rule on.
Yeah, if I could quickly explain the use of that word in terms of a covert meaning undercover or avoiding, and it is a ploy, if you like. It can be seen as a ploy to use a process to use a process.
I'm sorry, but there's a point you need to follow. Sorry, I should have stopped you then. What's your point of order?
Talking about using a ploy when there is a government mandated, in fact required piece of legislation for us to follow.
Stop, please, councillor. So it's accuracy. Is that your point of order?
There is a legal requirement for us to follow this process.
So I'll ask you to withdraw your word covert, please.
It's not just the word covert, it's now the word ploy as well.
So please refrain from using those types of words. It is central government legislation which is here to be used in a transparent manner.
Sure, I will do that.
Councillor Paula.
Mr. Mayor, thank you for your presentation. I'm interested in your comments around the process and its degree of contestability and what might be more suitable. So you're suggesting, and it might be through you, Mr. Mayor, later if one of our officers can also give us some clarity around this. If it goes through an SHA process, you're saying you'll be excluded from providing any evidence on the matters that you've put before us today. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yes, that's correct.
What process would therefore be preferred, in your opinion, given that the applicants have a right to have a process around their wishes for their land?
Yes, I guess the preferred process will be the plan change, which involves, which is still underway
the private plan change,
or a plan change process. Yes.
To just continue with the private plan change, and that would bring yourselves and any other industrial land that's not adjacent into the consideration. Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly right. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Dave. Councillor Mark.
Thank you. Thanks for your submission. I'm just trying to Google map AFCO here and just to see where the other closest housing areas are. Are there actually housing areas that are closer to AFCO and Open Country Dairy than this would be?
Yes, there are.
Okay, and have you taken a similar position with them?
There are, and for some of them that are on old AFCO land, there are covenants over the property in relation to AFCO reverse sensitivity. Yeah.
Okay, no, that'll leave me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, so the next presenter is Fonterra. Oh, 30, 10, 30, 11, 30. No, we're right. 2 hours. Welcome, gentlemen. You have 30 minutes. The clock is on the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. The 30 minutes includes questions, and the bell will ring 1 minute before the end of your time. The clock won't start until you're organised and ready. So, yeah, just want to welcome you here. Thank you for coming. I'll let you introduce yourselves, just so each member around here knows who you are and how you fit in. Thank you.
Good morning, Mayor Andrew, councillors. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present today. My name is Scott Nelson. I'm Operations Manager at the Fonterra Te Rapa facility. So it's my privilege to lead a team of 400 manufacturing staff on the site, and we've also got an additional 300 staff based on site who manage our support services, so our product technical, our labs, and our contact energy facility. So the ongoing viability of our manufacturing site at Te Rapa and Fonterra's continued investment in Te Rapa depends on our ability to process unimpeded 24/7 as we do currently. We therefore have significant concerns about this proposal that will look to establish 1,000 houses adjacent to our manufacturing facility at Te Rapa. So with me today, it's my privilege to have Alan Vandernagel, so Fonterra's Director of New Zealand Manufacturing, Daniel Minhinnick, who's our legal counsel from Russell McVeigh, who will cover the legal issues arising from the process associated with and assessing the applications, and Mark Crisp, the Planning Director from Mitchell Dash. So each of them will present a short summary of speaking notes and we'll run you through issues that cover Fonterra's investment, our operational strategy, and also the legal and planning issues. So I'd like to hand over to Alan.
Mayor Andrew, councillors, thank you for hearing us today. As Scotty introduced me, Alan van den Nagel. I'm the Director of New Zealand Manufacturing for Fonterra. I'm accountable for the operations of 25 of our sites across New Zealand, employing 7,000 people. We agree with many of the speakers and we support the need for housing for community development. The only thing that we are actually disagreeing here with is the location. The proposal is about housing. We are also concerned about employment. If approved, it will allow for at least 1,000 new houses to be built right next door to our Te Rapa dairy processing facility. In doing this, it will compromise not only the site's current operations, but it will also heavily influence whether Fonterra continues to invest or reinvest in this particular site. When constructed, the site was far out of town. We had to build a new workers' village when we constructed it 50 years ago. We've just recently had our 50-year anniversary, where all of our employees, many officials, Mayor Andrew, came and celebrated 50 years on the site. Today, Hamilton City is markedly closer to our doorstep. We, along with the others in the room, including Council, the Regional Council, NZTA and industrial landowners, have heavily invested in the policy process which guide land use decision-making for the city and for the region. These processes have consistently identified that Te Rapa North area for heavy industrial activities, and they have sought their protection from reverse sensitivity effects. That is, the location of sensitive activities in appropriate locations, like, for example, in the middle of an industrial zone. These processes have provided us with the confidence to grow our operations here in Hamilton City. Operations which include our national freight hub, which is located at Crawford Street. Today, Fonterra makes a significant contribution to the local economy and provides employment to over 700 people on our Te Rapa site, as outlined by Scott. In the last 3 years, we have invested a further $50 million in the site, which has added an additional 40 jobs. With this proposal justifying any additional investment or reinvestment in the Te Rapa dairy factory would be a struggle due to the potential reverse sensitivity risk and the lack of confidence in the Council's planning framework. To be clear, Fonterra does support residential developments, and particularly those that provide affordable housing. But these should provide and be provided in appropriate locations and not at the expense of land required for employment-generating activities. Much has been made by this application that there has been an oversupply of industrial land in Hamilton. We agree with Mr O'Dwyer in the report to the Council that demand for industrial land is indeed increasing. Recent announcements suggest that supply cannot keep up. We also agree with Mr O'Dwyer that there is no demand for this additional SHA. Further creating to the additional SHA will risk the viability of the others, as well as the Peacocks development, which are already underway. This development, if approved, will not just remove 51 hectares of industrial land, and because of its location in the middle of an industrial zone, it will effectively render those areas of land surrounding it impractical for heavy industry. Finally, the process itself. The implications of confirming the SHA are significant. Fonterra took heart from the Council requiring in its accord and policy that any new SHA would not be inconsistent with the Council's strategic planning. However, that is what this proposal does. It runs completely counter to every strategic policy document, which is also noted by Mr O'Dwyer and Hamilton City Council staff in the attached reports to the minutes.
and that is why we are concerned. Today, you'll not only decide upon whether to accept or reject the proposal at hand, you will also provide a clear steer to the major employment-generating activities about the confidence they should assign to those processes that sought to enable their continued viability and ability to generate employment and economic benefit for the region, and to protect them from the very thing that will constrain their ability, 1,000+ houses on the back doorstep. Thanks very much.
So Fonterra is strongly opposed to the proposal to fast-track large-scale residential development within the Te Rapa North Strategic Industrial Node. You have Fonterra's feedback on the proposal, and that includes reports from independent experts confirming that the proposal raises complex and significant issues. In summary, the application does not meet the relevant criteria you must consider it against. In particular, it directly conflicts with the key criterion the Council must assess: locational considerations. The Council Officer's report correctly identifies this as the fundamental issue for your decision. Under both the Housing Accord and your SHA policy, SHAs should not be approved that are inconsistent with the strategic plans for the city and the region. The Council Officer's report confirms that the application is inconsistent with almost every single strategic plan, and you'll hear from Mr. Crisp on that. Despite this, the officer suggests that the impact of this inconsistency is tolerable, as the adverse effects are manageable or uncertain. With respect, these conclusions are based on flawed reasoning, and adopting the report's conclusions will lead the Council into error. As the Council Officer recognises, the Council's decision is complex. It demands a comprehensive and robust assessment. This process does not provide for that. The right decision is to decline the application and defer it for consideration as part of the private plan change currently before the Council, particularly when Mr. O'Dwyer's report acknowledges this proposal is not required to meet housing demand. So moving on to the specifics, the proposal fails to satisfy the criteria in the HASHA legislation and is inconsistent with both the Accord and the SHA policy. The Housing Accord provides that any SHA must be consistent with Hamilton's key strategic planning documents, and the SHA policy itself specifically requires you to consider the extent to which a proposed SHA is consistent with Hamilton's strategic land use planning. And as I've said, that is acknowledged to be fundamental to the Council's decision. Fonterra agrees with the Council Officer that the application is inconsistent with the various strategic documents for the city and region. Decades of careful planning have led to the current framework. It should not be cast aside easily. Industrial businesses at Te Rapa North, including Fonterra, AFCO, Open Country Dairy and Ports of Auckland, among others, have invested and continue to invest in Hamilton because of the certainty the strategic framework provides. If approved, the proposal will undermine the strategic framework and have significant adverse effects on the businesses in Te Rapa North as well as Hamilton's economy. Despite acknowledging that the proposal is inconsistent with effectively every relevant planning document, the Council Officer concludes that the inconsistency is tolerable. That conclusion is flawed. It is based on an irrelevant issue: the economic implications of developing the site in the short term. It fails to consider the long-term implications for planning in Hamilton. The officer's recommendation places houses ahead of jobs and the economy. The Council Officer's report focuses on the economic assessments that have been undertaken and asserts that overall it is better to enable development rather than leave the land in question undeveloped for between 5 and 7 years. We reject that reasoning. Considering and weighing competing economic costs and alleged benefits is irrelevant. The Council is required to consider whether its strategic land use planning will be materially compromised or altered. Locating more than 1,000 dwellings in a heavy industrial area can do nothing other than compromise the Council's own strategic planning. Focusing on whether or not the site will be developed within a 5 to 7 year timeframe is irresponsible and contrary to good planning practice. Again, you'll hear from Mr. Crisp on this. Strategic planning requires a long-term planning horizon. The council should be concerned about the effects on the city in the long term rather than just one developer's short-term aspirations. If this proposal is declined, the applicant is still free to continue to pursue residential development through a plan change process. If it is approved, however, the integrity of Hamilton's strategic land use planning will be fundamentally undermined. Moving on to the specific effects, the Council Officer's report fails to consider the wider effects of establishing a large residential enclave within a strategic industrial node. These effects are significant. There is no evidence before the Council that the long-term effects of the proposal can be appropriately managed. The report fails to take into account the blighting effect of establishing large-scale residential activity within a heavy industrial zone. If residential activities are allowed to establish, Te Rapa North's value as a strategic industrial node will be sterilised and business confidence in the area lost. The proposal does not just remove 51 hectares of land from the node, it also effectively sterilises much of the node for industrial development. Fonterra's Te Rapa manufacturing site and other nearby industrial sites are at real risk of reverse sensitivity effects from inappropriately located residential development. Introducing thousands of residents into Te Rapa North will result in constraints on their operations and undermine their future viability. It will also foreclose future expansion of existing industrial activities. Without certainty as to their ability to operate or expand as required, it will become less economical for industrial operators to remain at Te Rapa North. Future investment will be discouraged, operations will be scaled back or relocated to other less constrained areas outside Hamilton or even outside the Waikato region. In addition to these effects, the proposal will result in costs to council. This is directly contrary to the express requirement in the SHA policy that SHA has placed no additional financial burden on the council. Roading upgrades will be required. Te Rapa Road does not have the capacity to cater for the proposed residential development. The road will need to be expanded to 4 lanes and a cost in the order of $40 to $50 million. These upgrades have been neither planned nor budgeted by the council. They've essentially been ignored by the applicant and by the council officer in his report. The proposed private developer agreement provides no detail about what transport works will be required to support the proposal or the costs of those works. Any traffic modelling or assessment undertaken in respect of the application is merely preliminary and is also fundamentally flawed. And so you have in your pack the report commissioned by Fonterra, commissioned by Abley Transport that sets out a number of those concerns in relation to transport. And there is no substantive evidence before the council that any of these adverse effects can be appropriately managed. Now, the council officer's recommendation to approve the application purports to be justified by the uncertainty as to the scale of effects of the proposal. With respect, that is irresponsible and is the antithesis of sound resource management planning. The council should adopt a responsible approach to the application. As an example, it would be unthinkable for a council or the Environment Court to approve an industrial activity with air discharges and other effects establishing next to a school or retirement village if there were known effects, but the scale of those effects was unknown. And that's what we have here. Approving this application without certainty as to its effects on the viability of the surrounding industrial users should be equally as inconceivable. As the council officer recognises appropriately, the council's decision is highly complex and involves a range of issues that require comprehensive assessment. Fonterra agrees. The proposal would therefore be more appropriately considered under the RMA plan change process that's already in chain. That would allow proper scrutiny to be given to all effects and issues. Private plan change for the proposed development is currently being processed by Council. That is the appropriate forum for this proposal. It is entirely inappropriate for it to be railroaded through the SHA process. The Council must decline the application.
Mayor King, councillors, my name's Mark Crisp. I've had at least 24 years experience working in the Te Rapa North and Horatu area, both for Fonterra, Waikato District Council and others. I was responsible for securing consents for the big capacity expansion of the Te Rapa Dairy Factory in 1996-97, including the cogeneration plant and the grade separated interchange onto Te Rapa Road. And I was also the principal author of the Horatu Industrial Study in 2004, which looked at the whole wider area and recommended that be identified for heavy industrial purposes, which then flowed into both the Waikato and the Hamilton City District Plan. Just in terms of my presentation here, which I think there's hard copies being handed out as well, I'll race through this because a lot of it's already been covered. As noted here, this has been a heavy industrial area for over 100 years, and in the proximity of activities like the Horatu Freezing Works and Te Rapa Dairy Factory are significant considerations. Te Rapa is the largest industrial activity in Hamilton, and it's located only 300 metres away from Te Awa Lakes. And it was deliberately built well away from urban residential activities. So if you look at this aerial photograph, this was taken in 1971, which is just 3 years after the Te Rapa Dairy Factory was commissioned, and you can see that there's very little around it. And it was so far out of town, it had to have its own workers' village there, which you can see in the bottom right-hand corner of the site. And when we did the capacity expansion in 96-97, we actually got rid of it because of the incompatibility of residential activities with the industrial site. And that was with those people who were residents there actually being workers on the site. It was just too much hassle. And even if you go out there today, you'll see that it's not being used for anything else. It's still vacant land. It was just an inappropriate land use there. So, as has been noted by many others, that the proposal is contrary to every strategic planning document that the council has and the region has, and those are all listed there. One of the key points that hasn't been noted is the 2005 strategic agreement on future boundaries between Hamilton City and Waikato District. When this area, the HT2's area, was brought into the city, it was on the basis that the area would be used for industrial purposes. And that was the basis upon which Fonterra agreed with the boundary relocation, because that provided it the certainty as to what the land uses would be around it. So, and the key thing is that avoids adverse effects on those industrial activities. And one of the most fundamental tenets of sound resource management planning is the separation of incompatible land uses. And that's what your strategic planning does. And so my view is that the Te Awa Lakes proposal is in the wrong location for residential activities. Hamilton has a vision for a compact and sustainable city. From an urban design perspective, this is in the wrong location. It's the furthest distance from Hamilton City, from urban infrastructure such as hospitals, schools and Waikato University. And you've heard from the Ministry of Education today that they can't provide schooling to kids that will be in this area. It's also distance from other planned residential communities, and it's totally out of character with the area, which is of an industrial character. And as previously noted, it will cause significant and unavoidable reverse sensitivity effects. You just need to think yourselves, would you approve a new dairy factory, a cogeneration power plant and a wastewater treatment plant next to an existing residential neighbourhood elsewhere in Hamilton City? I don't think you would. The proximity of such incompatible uses would clearly never be contemplated. This is just the same issue looking at the opposite end of the telescope. It's the proximity of these activities together. Dealing with transport effects, as was noted by Daniel, the Te Rapa Dairy Factory is already constrained in terms of its traffic generation because of constraints in the existing roading network. It has a limitation on the number of vehicles that can utilise the Te Rapa grade separated interchange. This proposal will take up that any further capacity, and it'll bring forward the need for four-laning of Te Rapa Road to 2021 at a cost of about 40 to 50 million. And the application does not consider who will pay for that cost. In terms of economic effects, it will not bring forward residential development. It will simply displace and delay alternative residential development, including in areas that the council is investing in, such as Peacock. And the underutilisation of existing and or planned infrastructure will lead to increased development charges and costs for council. And so therefore industrial land will not be developed near housing. The NZIER report that was commissioned by Fonterra concludes that there is enough land available out to 2035 to cater for residential growth without Te Awa Lakes. It's not necessary, and that's without including the Amberfield proposal, which is now being advanced in Peacocks for 909 lots. And therefore the Te Awa Lakes will reduce the productive capacity of the city's economy and lead to inefficient use of existing infrastructure. The geotechnical issues are used to say that the industrial development is not viable, but that is a situation entirely of the applicant's own making, resulting from extracting financial value from the site by sand winning. The challenges developing the site do not justify establishing incompatible land uses in the strategic industrial node. The viability assessment which was undertaken by the applicant is very narrow in its focus, and there could well be a range of other activities that could occur within the strategic industrial node. And I also note that it's intended to be a long-term land bank for industrial land in the city. So there's no expectation, even in the current regime, that it would be necessarily developed in the next few years. So, as noted by others, there is an alternative. There is the plan change process, and that is the correct process for dealing with complex issues that arise from this proposal. And so that is the way that I think that the application should be considered, whereby all parties can participate and all effects can be considered in a comprehensive way. Thank you.
So happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Councillor Gary.
Thank you, and thank you very much for your presentation. I just want to couch this carefully. You've raised a whole lot of process questions, which are, and I totally respect that, and it's the law and all that sort of, the law, it's all that sort of stuff. But I just want to just put those to one side for a second and just deal with the issues that are not the process ones, but are kind of the material, not to say that process isn't material, but the material things are, am I right in saying, reverse sensitivity and traffic, your concerns about traffic movement?
Yes, that's correct as far as the direct effects on Fonterra.
Okay.
As well as the consideration of how it actually stacks up against the relevant criteria, and that's where the...
And that's the process stuff I'm talking about.
Correct.
You're saying we're breaking our rules, we're ignoring our strategies and the decades-long lot of processes we've been through. So, and the process will be whatever the process turns out to be. Okay, so thank you, that was all. So it's the reverse sensitivity, which you're very concerned about, and it was the roading, which I heard you talking about. Is there other...
Well, the reverse sensitivity effects in particular have significant flow-on economic effects for the city and the region, as far as the possibility of investment being diverted elsewhere,
yes,
and those investment decisions being made, impacts on jobs, those sort of effects as well, which are tied into the reverse sensitivity concerns.
But if we're in a perfect world, say, and there was no reverse sensitivities and there was no roading issues, And if we'd got the process right, and I'm not saying we've got it wrong, but you're challenging the process we've got, you wouldn't say no. And I know this is all, what do you legal guys call you're not going to be held to whatever you say today. What's that called? Without prejudice, yeah, yes. Without prejudice. Are those the things that need to be sorted?
Yes, although, and those can all be considered through an alternative private plan change process. The question is a process one as far as whether this proposal is advanced through a special housing process or the alternative of a private plan change.
And I totally acknowledge your concerns on that. I understand where you're coming from.
But the question for the councillors today to make is there are specific criteria that need to be assessed, and it's considering this application against those criteria, and we say it just doesn't stack up.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councillor Dave.
Thanks very much. I can appreciate the arguments you put. I've got a couple of questions sort of relating to consistency, I reckon. The immediately over the river from the current Te Rapa factory, and I'm not sure who wants to answer this, you've got about a dozen houses. Is that been an issue for them? They're quite expensive housing, let's say, very expensive housing, and they're in an area that in future is slated to come into Hamilton City. HT1, I think it's called.
Yes, that has been an issue. That was a rural residential policy area that was established by Waikato District Council about 25, 30 years ago, and that has been the source of most of the complaints that Fonterra has had to deal with, and sort of clear evidence of reverse sensitivity effects. And if that's what we're getting from, as you say, about a dozen residences, when you've got 1,000, the management of those issues becomes disproportionately greater.
Nevertheless, there have been some new houses put in that same area directly across the river from the Fonterra property, hasn't there, in the last 10 years, say?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. And in the last 12 months, a new subdivision has been developed just to the north and across the river from the area we're talking about here today, in the Waikato district, between the two bridges, let's say. I don't know what it's called. Is that correct?
I take your word for that.
Yeah. And did Fonterra submit in opposition or ask for conditions in relation to buffers and things like that, anything like that?
Not in that situation. It's a case of Fonterra has accepted council's strategic planning, which is to provide for residential growth on the eastern side of the river and preserve the western side of the river for industrial purposes. And even that is not without its risks in terms of reverse sensitivity. I mean, you just look at what's happened with Western Springs. That's the ultimate scenario of what can occur when reverse sensitivity issues play out.
When the last, excuse me, when the last district plan, Hamilton City district plan came through, and the buffer, noise buffer to the north of the dairy factory came through, did Fonterra ask for buffers for other, to mitigate other effects other than noise, or larger buffers?
It didn't need to, because it was surrounded by industrial zoning. If there was residential zoning, or previously under the Waikato District Plan, it was rural zoning, which provided for rural residential subdivision. That was a problem, but that was a problem that was solved as part of the resolution of appeals on the Waikato District Plan, which then flowed into the Hamilton City District Plan when that area was brought into the city, and it retained its industrial status, and that solved the problem. So they didn't have to have other measures to protect themselves, because they had compatible land uses planned for around the site.
There's a major...
So last question, please, Dave.
Okay. There's a major community centre immediately to the north of the factory, isn't there?
What do you mean by community centre?
Well, the Sikh temple, which has a lot of community activities. It's defined as community centre under our rating policy.
Yeah, that's an activity where they turn up on a weekend and undertake their activities. It's not a situation where they're living there 24/7 and getting annoyed, and they don't lodge complaints against Fonterra.
Councillor Paula.
They do lodge complaints. I'm sorry, they do. Oh, sorry, they do lodge complaints.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My questions relate to 4 slides back, the one that's entitled Economic Effects. And I am interested in a deeper response to why you believe that it will displace and delay as opposed to bring forward residential development. And the second bullet point I'm interested in more information about is the underutilisation of existing and or planned infrastructure, leading to the increase of development charges. Can you just talk me through those two bits,
Sure.
please? Thank you.
Sure. If I take the second point first, the council was about to borrow a significant amount of money under the auspices of the HIF fund, and it is going to be investing that in predominantly down in the south end of town in Peacocks, and it has a 10-year period in which to pay that money back. Every section that is sold in Te Awa Lakes is a section that is not sold somewhere else in the city, given the same demand. So that means that if you've got 1,000 lots that are going to be taken up in the north part of town, it means they're not going to be purchased elsewhere in town. That means you're going to have a slower payback in terms of the money that you're borrowing. That means you're going to be paying a lot more in interest because it's going to take you a lot longer to pay back that loan. And that infrastructure that you've planned and paid for and installed, including the bridge over the Waikato River, would be underutilised in that intervening period.
And
Okay,
and the second part.
Okay, this is the last question.
What is the second bullet point? The underutilisation, the increase of development charges. Can you talk?
Well, that's the development charge. The development costs. The council will experience greater development costs because you're now having to pay a lot more interest because it's taking you longer to get a payback because you're now spreading your eggs in too many baskets rather than focusing on where you're actually investing your money.
Okay, thank you.
And there's one of the reports that Fonterra provided was by Brown Copeland, and that's an economic report that goes into more detail about those economic issues. So you do have that information with you as part of your agenda report as well.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen, and thank you for what you do for our region and our city. Do appreciate it. Thank you. Okay, we'll have one more presenter before morning tea, and that is Ports of Auckland. Okay, you have 10 minutes to present. The clock's on the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. A bell will ring at 1 minute before you finish. The time includes question time. Thank you for coming. Don't start till you're ready. The clock won't start until you are ready to go.
My name's Mark Arbuthnot. I'm a planner with a resource management consultancy called Bentley & Co. We've been engaged by Ports of Auckland to speak to you on their behalf about the special housing application at Te Awa Lakes. My involvement with Ports of Auckland, specific to this area, was involved primarily with obtaining the resource consents for the development of their inland freight hub that's currently under construction, as well as representing them at some recent plan changes at the Waikato district level in terms of some rezoning that happened within Horatiu village as well. So just to put it in the context again, in red, what you can see is the Ports of Auckland's Waikato Freight Hub. It's currently under construction, as you can see. Occupies 33 hectares of land, the Northgate Business Park. And what it is Ports of Auckland's largest freight hub in the North Island for them. This is an image of what the completed development will look like. It comprises rail sidings, pavement contained yards, warehouses, distribution activities. And it's a staged development over a number of years. And when complete, will have capacity for an annual throughput of approximately 300,000 containers per year. Now, to put that into context, that's a third of the throughput that goes through the Ferguson terminal at the Port of Auckland. And it's a bit less than a third of the containers that have gone through the Port of Tauranga as well. So they do about 1 million. I think Ports of Auckland were up 990, something like that, last year. And strategically for the Ports of Auckland, the Waikato Freight Hub is very important. It connects with Wiri in the north and South Auckland, recently constructed, Mount Maunganui, Longburn and Palmerston North, and then has links out to Port Taranaki and the Napier Port, where Ports of Auckland have supply negotiations with those ports. And this particular site was chosen after a long search of over 60 properties from Auckland to the South Waikato. And the reason why this particular site was chosen was because of its suitably located near existing industrial nodes, which again you can see from here, from the future-proof settlement pattern, you can see its proximity to Rapa and the other industrial nodes within the immediate vicinity. It has northbound and southbound rail access to the North Island Main Line. It has good road access to the Waikato Expressway via an existing separated grade interchange. It's also sufficient length to accommodate trains, has sufficient width for the efficient handling of freight. It's reasonably level, and it's located within an existing industrial zoned area. Now, all of those factors were very important to Ports of Auckland when they selected this particular site. Ports of Auckland see their freight hub as being a bit of a game changer in terms of how industrial land at Northgate Business Park and within Te Rapa will develop. They anticipate that a hub will be developed and see the land at Te Rapa as being equally and strategically important to other industrial and logistic businesses who are expected to locate to the area as a consequence of the freight hub development. Now, ports themselves are concerned that the special housing area will adversely affect locational attributes of the industrial land resource and make the balance of the land, the industrial zone land, less desirable from that perspective. The ability for the hub to be developed and the corresponding agglomeration of activities around the freight hub will be compromised. More sensitive receivers will be introduced to the environment, and that's important because Ports of Auckland have to operate from here 24 hours per day. They use rail, they use road connections, and they cannot be, and regardless of whether or not compliance is achieved with any noise standards, they cannot be constrained by non-industrial operators in terms of their operations. And the key issue with the special housing area process is that it prevents Ports of Auckland from seeking appropriate management measures from being imposed on sensitive receivers within the SHA land. And ports have developed such measures in the vicinity of their Port of Auckland through the unitary plan process and historic district plan processes. And typically, ports can manage, or the potential conflicts between the two areas can be managed at the Port of Auckland anyway, in downtown Auckland, through a combination of noise controls on the port, but as also through minimum acoustic insulation requirements, no complaints covenants, those wider things that impose new development that occur within the area of the port. This can't happen through this process because when you recommend this SHA for approval, you can only impose conditions on the specific things, number of dwellings, height, those sorts of things. You can't step into actual rules beyond those three matters that are contained within the recommendation. So Ports of Auckland concerned that significant planning issues are not being given the opportunity to be addressed through expert evidence. They're also concerned that the SHA will be at the expense of development in the area as an industrial hub. And obviously, if you heard today, through your housing accord with the government, you've undertaken to give effect to the HASHA legislation by ensuring development is progressed in a manner that is generally consistent with your core strategic planning documents. Okay, you've heard about that. And I agree with the Council report that consideration of the SHA application is very complex, and it has a high degree of overlap with the concurrent plan change process, which is currently occurring under the RMA with the Council. And I also agree with the planner that the plan change process is significantly more robust and consultative compared to the current process under HASHA legislation. And it's better suited to dealing with these complex land use issues that are being proposed here. In my opinion, the special housing area will result in an unsustainable built form. It does not make use of identified opportunities for urban intensification under the district plan and does not promote a compact urban form. Doesn't minimise the need for private motor vehicles, and it doesn't separate residential activity from strategic industrial nodes and industrial activities, and undermines the ability for industrial activities to agglomerate around Horatiu and Te Rapa. As I've discussed, there's no requirement under the HASHA legislation to pursue a plan change once the SHA is confirmed. So there's no guarantee under this process that any potential reverse sensitivity effects that were being addressed here will actually come through within any subsequent planning documents. Putting that fact to one side, and the fact that the proposal is fundamentally at odds with the strategic planning documents for the district and the region, the Council has identified that the special housing area is not required to meet the housing demands of the district. You've already met your 2017 targets. You're on track to meet your 2018 targets. You've approved nearly 1,500 units of Road to Cowrie. You've got resource consent also lodged for 1,000 greenfield dwellings at Amberfield. You've got the MPS and Future Proof confirming that there's sufficient capacity within the sub-region to meet demand for housing growth over the short, medium and long terms. And really, in my opinion, using this special housing area application as a tool to provide a contingency in the event that some of this capacity is not taken up isn't the relevant test under the legislation. You need to be able to demonstrate that there's a demand to create qualifying development. And in this particular instance, for this particular site, you have sufficient capacity to meet the foreseeable demands for the district and other locations that are consistent with the planning framework. Therefore, in my opinion, the HASHA legislation is the wrong vehicle to progress these plans. As acknowledged by the officer's report, the RMA is the correct, as acknowledged in the officer's report, the RMA is the correct vehicle to ensure that a robust analysis of the costs and benefits of the proposal are undertaken and is better suited to dealing with complex strategic land use changes to the type proposed. The degree of complexity and inconsistency with the planning framework is such that for a robust decision to be arrived at, the proposal needs to be subject to a full hearing to ensure that the strategic planning matters are appropriately considered. And that can only occur through the plan change process. And what I would conclude is it's not about losing the ability to realise the positive effects from being able to develop the land for an alternative purpose. It is just the process that you're going through to make sure that whatever decision you land at is robust. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you. We're out of time, so I have 4 people on the board who want to make questions, so I'll take one question from each person, starting with Deputy Mayor Martin.
In Auckland, with your port by the harbour, and I realise it's obviously, sorry.
No, it's on. It's on, mate.
Sorry.
In Auckland, with your port by the harbour, if as the crow flies, there's really significant Parnell, downtown Auckland, high density, a lot of significant residential developments very, very close to your port, which presumably operates round the clock. How do you manage that?
In that particular instance, what you have is a planning framework in place that A, places constraints on the level of noise that the ports of Auckland can generate beyond the boundaries of its site, and B, puts a requirement on all other sensitive receivers locating to the area to achieve a minimum level of acoustic insulation, as well as to enter no complaints covenants with the Port of Auckland to ensure that basically both sides of the coin are managed appropriately. And that's the point that I'm making, is that this special housing area, the HASHA legislation, doesn't enable you to create that planning framework that would otherwise address those concerns.
Councillor Dave.
Thanks. In the Horotū area, within a small number of hundred of metres of your Ports of Auckland development area outlined in red in your aerial shot, there are new houses going in the Horotū township and also in the rural subdivision on the slopes above the Ports of Auckland site, coming in off Onion Road, are there not?
There are. So in terms of the new residential within Horotū village, there was it last year, maybe the year before last, I can't quite recall now, the plan change that went through, it was Narua, Wahia, Horotū, etc., had some changes to zoning boundaries and what have you. Within that, there was some industrial land and there was some other rural zoned land that got changed over to countryside living and other living purposes. As part of that process, Ports of Auckland sought and received a very similar management regime to what happens at the Port of Auckland, downtown Auckland, around managing those effects. Onion Road, there are existing farm, well, it's called the hobby farm, I can't quite recall the proper name, but there are existing residential receivers within there, and that was more of a case of Ports of Auckland ensuring that they can manage their activities to achieve a decent, appropriate standard of acoustic amenity or general amenity to those existing properties.
Thanks.
Councillor Angela. Okay, thank you. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, just for the sake of planning your day, we'll stop now till 11:45 for lunch. We have 2 more presentations which will take us for morning tea. We have 2 more presentations that will take us to around about 1:45, at which stage we'll stop for around about 3/4 of an hour. So that's not locked in. I'm just letting you know that's what how I'm intending to run it. So if you want to plan anything ahead, it gives you a bit of a chance.
From now?
1:45.
Oh, 1:45, okay.
Yep, thank you. Yep. This is a cup of tea, John. So what I want to Okay, welcome Mana Whenua Group. I'll let you introduce yourselves when you're ready. You have 25 minutes to speak. That's 5 minutes for each of your hapu. You can do it in any you like, so I'll leave it to you to present how you like. The clock is in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. A bell will ring 1 minute before the 25 minutes is up, and you need to wrap up with before the 25 minutes. Inside the 25 minutes will be time for questions. Just prepare yourselves, get yourselves ready, and once you start, the clock will start. Thank you.
Tēnā koe te whare, tēnā koe e mea Andrew, e wāte hia mai te huarahi tēnei kia mātou kia harama. Tēnā koe hoki e te rangatira Martin Gallagher, tō mihi kia koro wetere, me te ahuatanga i tēnā rangatira, ko te noa ki te motu. E te tūtauto. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou. Kia ora, I'm Sonny Karena. I'm here representing, as part of the Tangata Whenua, Mana Whenua group that has been established within Hamilton City over the last 19 years, I guess since the establishment or the advent of the Resource Management Act back in 1991, and of which I've been involved ever since. Current Mana Whenua group is Te Hāpō Whenua o Kirikiriroa. From that group, from the makeup of that group, different members have then become a part of developers' Mana Whenua groups, of which we are here to support the application of special housing area at Te Awa Lakes and Perry's fortitude, in our opinion, for developing that particular area. As part of the Mana Whenua group, I represent Ngāti Haua within that group. Our general tribal area is extending from Kāmai right through to the east side of the Hamilton River, Waikato River, in Hamilton East there. Our tribal groupings in the past have been very close, joined together often by genealogies. And within the Hamilton City here, there are 5 Mana Whenua tribes that affiliate to the Mana Whenua group within Hamilton City. The other groups that are here, of course, are Ngāti Wairere, Ngāti Mahanga, Ngāti Koroki Kahu, Ngāti Tamanupo, and interests, of course, from Tūranga Wāwai Marae in that particular area. Our interests are purely social, with commercial opportunities that may be uptaken if they arise for our tribal members. Within our history, within the Hamilton city boundaries, has been a long history. We have had dwellings and marae and pā along the riverbanks, from Cambridge through to the Port of Waikato. Within the current city boundaries, there have been identified a number of ancient marae sites that are still significant to us today. With the developments that are currently taking place and that will provide housing and opportunity for our whānau to be able to participate and to ascend onto the home ownership ladder, if you like. The dynamics around that is that over the last maybe 5, 6, 7 generations, there have been many migrating families from within our traditional tribal areas to urban areas. Work, employment, housing have always been an issue. We are by no means unrestricted in the rural areas where most of our marae are to develop. There are restrictions out there as well, and they're all industrial restrictions. The primary industry, we have no. We completely support to those ends. We do have interests within the primary industries and shares and etc. Farming, and within industry within the city boundaries as well. And not wanting to stem the progress of industry within our city, we are also mindful of the potential loss of opportunities socially within our communities. Where our tribal members, which live out of the region, for many reasons, the migrations took place over, like I said, over the last 5 generations from our marae areas, traditional areas, to places like the Big Smoke, Auckland and Wellington, including in Invercargill. Many of our tribal members live there, who are all wanting to come home. There are 3rd, 4th, 5th generations that live outside of our tribal areas. They have skills and resources to contribute to our region here today. They're wanting to come back. There's nowhere to come back to. Even on our tribal back out there in the countries there in Morrinsville and Te Awamutu and Huntly and Narrawahia are all stemming by restrictions as well. Even if we were allowed to build subdivisions out near our marae, the employment opportunities just don't exist there. So we're supporting this kaupapa for housing and opportunities that may come our way, and commercial opportunities that may come our way. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to my my colleague here. We're just a small team here today, but we represent a very large population within this community. Kia ora.
Kia ora. My name is Carolyn Hopper, and in this forum I'm representing Ngāti Wairere. So this part of the kōrero is about Māori and the order of the Māori, the well-being of the life force. So, and I don't want to assume that everybody has the level knowledge in terms of what these mean, so I'm just going to be really basic about it. So Māori is around life force, and order is about good health and well-being. Our role as mana whenua in this particular forum is about assuming the responsibility to ensure that the life force and well-being of the land and the people is maintained. And that's predominantly because the land is nothing without the people, and the people certainly are nothing without the land. And so it's a whole cycle. And achieving Māori order, or achieving balance, is actually the role that I take really seriously. This is a little bit like karaoke without music. And I reserve the right, sorry, Your Honour, to contradict quite possibly some of my colleagues, because I'm the only woman sitting on this panel too. Kaitiakitanga, and I'm only guessing that we all know what that means. So that's a role we have assumed by whakapapa. That's a role that we have assumed by genealogy. I'm not here because I enjoy this, and I'm not here because I don't have anything better to do. I'm here because my father places the responsibility on me to represent Ngāti Wairere and to do it well. And so having that responsibility is really a huge thing. So I'm therefore the kaitiaki of the genealogy, the past, the present and the future. And those are the points that Sunny was making. And in doing that, I also need to make sure that we achieve the balance, the Māori order. And that balance through my eyes as Ngāti Wairere are about economic sustainability, they're about social sustainability, they're about cultural sustainability, and they're about environmental sustainability. And isn't that just the hardest thing to achieve? Because all of us have that responsibility. The difference with us as Māori is that all of those strategies of responsibility are underpinned by Māori values. And I'm going to hand it on to my colleague.
Kia ora koutou, Mayor Andrew, Deputy Mayor, Councillor, CEO, tēnā koutou. My name is Dennis Ngātaki, and I'm here on behalf of Tūranga Wāwai Trust Board. Marae, we are predominant hapu, Ngāti Mahuta. But I'm here to just go through a couple of slides. The one that you see above there really gives an outline of the rohe of Waikato Tainui. You will see there that we have some 33 hapu. Within our rohe, we're made up of some 68 marae, 72,000 odd tribal beneficiaries, and a population across the board of 2 million people. But the emphasis that I want to place is that you'll see there within the Hamilton area, there is a large population of Tainui representatives. And putting up that slide there really just gives an indication. I know some of the councillors would have probably already seen these slides, but we just wanted to give you an outline of where a lot of our beneficiaries are based. A lot of them are in and around this Hamilton district. So our Rōpū, or our mana whenua group, really with the support, the initial support of Tainui, through this process, is here as a collective, like it's already been support the special housing accord put forward by Perry. I want to just sort of go on and capture the next slide, and it really just talking about our involvement to date. We've been working on this with Tower Lakes with Perry's for about the last 12 to 18 months as a group. Initially, all the groups were brought together by Perry's with the assistance of both of Misco Representative Norman Hill, some of the other key staff within Perry's, to just see who had the interest within this area of this development here that's been proposed. So from it, you've got the mana whenua group here that are working as a collective, and we have sort of been through quite a bit of documentation that's been produced, particularly with the proposed plan change, your wish. We've covered off quite a bit of things that we feel are detrimental and need to be looked at specifically by Perry's. And today, that's work, because we've had sufficient time to cover a lot of aspects of it, it's been quite good and rewarding for us as mana whenua. So I just wanted to highlight those on behalf of our mana whenua. And I know that Norman did, and I'll highlight a bit more. So that's just basically my presentation. Kia ora koutou.
Using our river to connect our towns has been a concept that has been employed by our tupuna, I guess right through to the current community and society. Waikato River have had industry established by tangata whenua over many years, many generations, including history around the flour mills, etc. But the river itself is a living entity to us. Besides providing opportunities with connecting to different pass sites, different villages, and now different towns, it was also the connection to the world through the Puaha Waikato, and using that to export, transport resources and goods to the fledgling town of Auckland in the day. It still holds the same significance to tangata whenua today. To have a place on the river again is just a dream for many of our generations over many years. we had dwellings on the riverbank within Hamilton City, current Hamilton City now. We can't live there anymore. We're always looking for opportunity to be able to live on the river again. The river is our tupuna. The river is me, and I am the river, is our for many generations. And this, along with other developments in the city currently, will give us that opportunity to see that again, and also to bring a lot of our people who have been alienated from the city in the past to come back and to contribute to the of the region. And that's the koha that's being referred to up there, to return and to provide that growth. An integrated and holistic approach, and that's always been our way. Consultation periods, consultation processes that took place pre-1991 were just a matter of knocking on the back door of the nearest kaumātua and saying, oh, we want to do this, we want to do that. And just a nod of the head, the construction went ahead. Post-1991, it's been a story we've been talking, and right through to now. This is the first opportunity that, well, this is the first reason that I've had to come here to council and to provide a submission. Many times, including today, that we take out of our culture to come and provide this. For me, the tangi at Tūranga Wāwai is significant enough with Koro Wetere lying there, but at his side, and came in yesterday with two other leaders that are both lying there now. So there are three tangi that are happening at Tūranga Wāwai today, each of whom are leaders within their own fields. Whaiapare, for instance, is the kuia of the Māori wardens within Hamilton City. Boy Tewiata is responsible for many of the carvings that are in our civil buildings here in Hamilton City. And of course, Koro Wetere, who has represented his people valiantly for many years. So these people are there. We took time out to come here, and that's how important it is for us. I'm sure many of you employees here know the story around many of your Māori employees. When a tangi comes up, they're disappeared. They've gone for 3 days. Today, we've had to break that and to come here and to bring some awareness around the opportunity, the benefits that this project could ultimately bring to my people and community. Kia ora.
I'm going to refer to Taipari Paiao, which is the Waikato Tainui Environmental Plan. The reason why the environmental plan is so significant is because it provides the signpost to a map that serves to maintain, restore and enhance the health and well-being of our land, of our waterways and of our people, because our people are only ever as healthy as the land. What that document also does is that it also shows our aspirations to be, and I'm going to refer now to, I didn't know what exemplar meant, but I do know what a good partnership looks like. And I do know that the resource management served to try and move us towards a good partnership. So did the principles of the treaty. So did the settlement of 1995. So did the river settlement of 2008 and the Healthy Rivers Accord and all of the legislation that talk about us being partners in this space. And so Mana Whenua is supportive of the Te Awa Lakes project because it allows us to be involved, it allows us to participate, it allows us to try to aspire to achieve some economic independence, and it's simple things. If we can help our people get jobs through this project, and I did hear what some of the other presenters said about who they employ and how many people they employ. We have 72,000 tribal members that we're responsible for. We want to be able to provide warm and healthy housing. We want them to be able to come home, which is what Sunny was alluding to. The point of difference for us as Mana Whenua, other than all the other huge responsibilities that I believe are on our shoulders on this particular forum, is that we're not talking about money. and we're not talking about politics, and we're not talking about economics. We're not planners and we're not engineers, but we're Māori and we're passionate. And I would like to see our people come home. I would like to know that my grandson has a space on the land where my great-grandparents and my tupuna grew up on. And I think, and I just want to point this out, between the Te Awa Lakes project and Fonterra is a little space called Mangaharakeke. It's a pā site. I'm a direct descendant of one of the tupuna that lived on that pā site, I Ranui. And I guess that's why I'm a little bit more passionate about my ability to participate in this forum, support projects like this, make a commitment to long-term strategies, not just for my people, but for everybody, to be able to collaborate, gosh, can't even say it, at every level, so that we're all helping to look after each other. I'm not too sure what capital means. Maybe it's Wellington. But I do know what capability is, and I do know what that looks like. And I do know that it also impinges on the ability to be able to create a space of well-being for the future. We all know that Māori are the worst statistics in this country. I don't need to reiterate any of that, but I do believe that this project may not be able to solve all of that, but it can contribute to it. And that's part of my role, part of my wanting to be within this particular forum, sitting alongside of my whanaunga, is to be a part of that growth and a part of that development. It's not about money for me, it's about the future. Ngā mihi. Kei a koe whānau.
Kia ora tātou. Our presentations are very much like the river, very organic and very flowy. So in conclusion, the key points that have been raised, it is about health and wellbeing, focus on the future, and it is really about leadership, providing solutions and responsive leadership. And we acknowledge that leaders are pioneers. We acknowledge the leadership of the late Hare Puke, Mr. Perry, Robert Mahuta, and the legacy that they've left for us. And so this is a legacy decision for us as a community in partnership. It is about Waikato, for Waikato. Kei konei ngā uri whakatupu, we are all Indigenous people of this whenua, and so it is for us, making decisions for us as a people. We want to maximise on the Waikato River its opportunity it creates in terms of opening up the corridor. And we talk about the corridor, it is a strategic thing, and Te Awa Lakes being on that corridor, it makes absolute prudent sense that we support the opportunities to open up and maximise for us as a people and as a community. We as a people have power through communication. This is one of the many, well, I'm not quite sure, but in terms of the SHA, we acknowledge that Perry's have actually empowered us through information, through communication, and actually through partnership. We've been on this 18-month journey through the RMA, ensuring that all information is at the table so we can make robust and accountable decisions. You know, we stand on the giants of yesteryear, Sir Robert Mahuta and others, in terms of the Raupatu, both the settlement and the river trust, the river settlement. So we acknowledge the responsibilities there for us as a people. There is a saying, mā mua ka kite a muri, mā muri ka ora a mua. Those who lead give sight to those who follow. Those behind give life to those who lead. The aspirations of this generation and the legacy we want to leave, that's been affirmed. This is an exemplar, a fantastic example of partnership, a community in partnership for the betterment of our community holistically. It is an investment in our city, our place, our home, our whenua, our community, our culture, and our taiao, our environment. Essentially, collaboration and working in partnership with Perry's to advance Te Awa Lakes, to rebuild strong, prosperous and healthy whānau that aligns to our strategic plan Whakatupuranga 2050 of Waikato Tāne, and the saying that King Tawhia provided for us, ko tahi te kōwha o te ngira, na ai te miro mā, te miro pango me te miro whiro. There's one eye of the needle through which the white, red and the black threads pass. That is us as a community advancing these aspirations. Mā tō raurau, mā taku raurau ka ora ai te iwi. With your contribution and our contribution, the people will thrive. Tēnā koutou katoa.
Okay, we're nearly out of time, so I'll take, there's 3 people on the board, I'll take one question from each of you. So starting with Councillor Gary.
Thank you, and thank you for your presentation. I'm still not sure why you're supporting it.
Well, basically, that's why we're here. We want
It's
to
the
make
what?
sure that whatever, it's about the future of the future generations. But part of our responsibility is to also ensure that there's no adverse impact on the environment there, on the land and on the river. We don't believe that there's going to be for as long as we're sitting at that table, which is why partnership's such a big thing.
Besides the housing opportunities that it will provide for our people, albeit small, from within our community of 76,000 odd people. But those are the opportunities that don't come up day in, day out, day in, day out. If they come up in these kind of situations and developments, then we're here to support that. We're not here actually to jump or to stand on progress of industry. We're not. However, there are very small windows for us to be able to take that opportunity. These are one of those.
Thank you.
Councillor Angela.
Just following up from Councillor Mallett, so are there any exact tangible outcomes from your partnership to your people?
We believe that there is. We believe that we're working towards them. We haven't had detailed conversations around what that might look like. We've had some really broad conversations around co-management, around the social housing issues in particular, employment, education, you know, training, opportunities, but nothing specific. We're still testing the partnership.
Okay, thanks. That's exactly what I was after. Thank you.
Councillor Siggy.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Kia ora, for your wonderful presentation. Look, I just one added question, and that again follows on because we've got a number of other SH8s going in Hamilton City, and I just wonder whether you saw in any of the other ones a possibility of partnership like you see here.
Good question. We haven't been involved in any other developers in regards to the SHA, and we're not quite sure why. We are at the table with Perry's in regards to advancing a partnership, so we've been empowered through the communication over a long period of time to provide a unique point of difference in regards to this SHA, so that we can really advocate for our taiao, for our environment, the Māori and our people in terms of homing those in need for us. So that's something that's been unique for this particular case. Is actually we're actually at the table having a conversation, protecting our environment as through the RMA processes, but talking directly with the developers at the highest level to ensure those outcomes are at the forefront of the decision-making processes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much for coming in. Thanks for taking the time out to present, and we do appreciate you being here.
Kia ora.
So now, Perry Group. Can somebody pass those out? They shouldn't have to. Welcome. 30 minutes to present. The 30 minutes includes any questions, and a bell will ring 1 minute before the end of your presentation to give you time to wrap up. Don't start till you're ready. The clock won't start until you're ready to go. We acknowledge Simon Perry, who's here today as well.
E ngā mana, e ngā reo, e ngā iwi o te motu e hui hui nei. Tēnei kia ora koutou katoa. Thank you for the opportunity to be able to present to you today. We have in our team represented, and we will speak directly to the SHA, Kate Barry Pachenko, our barrister, who has been part of the team in putting together this. Thomas, you will recognise has been part of the team as well. John Oliver with BBO and Harriet McKee from Oricon. Apologies from Aaron Collier, who was our SHA planner from Tauranga. He had a bereavement himself, so he's had to attend to that, hence Harriet attending. Just a couple of opening comments. We're going to talk through the proposal, largely led by John, and being able to speak to those technical aspects of it. We've spoken to the hearts and mind. It was good that you heard from Mana Whenua directly. When Perry's have been involved in significant projects adjacent to the order, the Māori of what we are trying to achieve has always meant that we connect to the people of the land. It was undertaken when Brian and Sir Robert put together the casino, was the first opportunity to open the river at that stage, and it now continues through this next generation with Nanaya and Simon and the rest of iwi. So we think it's an important location that takes into consideration those opportunities, and we'll speak to the presentation of the SHA now. So John, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Lale. So yes, and I'm a planner based in Hamilton, so I've been involved in planning around the Waikato for over 30 years. My involvement in Horotū Te Rapa goes back to probably around 2001, 2002, where I was working for the landowners who currently or previously owned the Northgate developments out there. So I've been intimately involved in all the process at Horotū Te Rapa right up until today. So yes, in terms of what I'm going to speak to, I'm just going to speak to the notes that have been handed around, really focusing on some of the technical issues and some of them, some of the questions that have been asked already. I'll try and on the way through this. I guess any specifics on SHA process and experience could potentially be directed to Harriet or Kate, because they've got extensive experience with SHA process in Tauranga and Queenstown and Auckland. So first of all, I agree with the conclusions and recommendations in the staff report from Luke O'Dwyer that you've received. I think it's a fair and balanced report. I think it's important to realise it's not really surprising that this SHA is out of zone. It's not zoned residential. And as a result, it does require assessment under the locational considerations criteria in your policy. Typically, SHAs don't align with existing planning frameworks. If they were aligned, then the land would already be zoned residential, would already envisage residential use, and there'd be little incentive for an SHA process. Got to remember the purpose of the HASHA Act is quite different to the RMA. Primary purpose is to enhance affordability by facilitating an increase in land supply, and that purpose is elevated above the purpose of the RMA and the provisions of the district plan. This SHA, of course, as you're aware, delivers a significant number of houses, 1,000, and at least 400 are to be affordable. So there have been some questions and discussion about the process under an SHA and what happens down the track. Got to remember that although the HASHA process results in provision for housing, it does not bypass a resource consent process. So the resource consent process that's required will still be required, and that resource consent process will involve conditions being set by the council on all the environmental issues that this particular site raises, and that includes reverse sensitivity issues. So it's very clear in my mind that this is a preliminary process to establish that the SHA can go ahead, but the secondary process is still a resource consent. And you've got to remember the purpose of HASHA was to speed things up. So the private plan change process, yes, it's a valid process, and as you know, the private plan change has been lodged and is underway. It takes about 3 years if there are appeals.
The HASHA process, if it's done correctly, can reduce that by 2/3. Less than a year, you can do the whole thing. And so the whole purpose of HASHA is to get houses built faster. And that's just been reinforced by recent government policy as well. So turning to some of the background information that you've got on your 641 pages of agenda, just wanted to briefly mention the Essentia report and the Verus peer review report. Those reports that have been done confirm that this site can't be viably developed for its allocated strategic industrial purpose, and the words used are for the foreseeable future. So if it's not fit for its allocated purpose, then it can't be strategic industrial land. It just can't be, because it's not fit for purpose. So really what's happening through this process, the SHA process, is you're not actually losing industrial land, you're just gaining housing land. That's the way I would characterise it. The Te Awa Lake site is a single site, 51 hectares, within the Te Rapa North industrial node. So that node is about 252 hectares in area. And if you then add the adjoining Horotū node, because really they work together, they're not separate, they're just separated by an expressway and a local authority boundary, then there's actually about 430 hectares of land. In the Te Rapa North, about 189 hectares of land is actually vacant or in rural use. So there's a very large area of greenfields land, quite separate from the Te Awa Lake site, that is and will remain available for future development. Regional policy statement, there's been quite a bit of reference to some of those strategic documents so far. It actually identifies a need for only 85 hectares of industrial land in Te Rapa North. So you can compare that to the 252 hectares that's actually earmarked, if you like, for future industrial use. So given these large land areas, an alternative use of this site doesn't have, in my view, any material impact on the extent of the land resource allocated to industry on either a sub-regional or local basis. So I agree with the recommendations in Mr. O'Dwyer's report to actually look at revisiting the deferred industrial zoning in Te Rapa North. And the reason for that is that there's such a large area there, including that greenfields land, that given the long-term planning now, it is actually timely to start to look at that, some of those other areas in Te Rapa North, as to whether they're going to be needed in the future. Got to remember that much of the strategic work that was first undertaken by Future-Proof and then picked up in the regional policy statement is now well out of date, 2008, 2009. And really there's been so many changes, economic changes, changes in growth predictions and demand, changing patterns in industrial land use and in employment land. So plan changes for at least some of this, this other deferred industrial land should be considered. But in my view, the evidence is unequivocal that there is ample unused land capacity, but consideration still will need to be given to demand uptake and infrastructure programming. So through the plan change process, which as you're aware is underway, Perry's and their advisors have made very good progress on a number of fronts, really focusing on advancing relevant technical work, and that's in discussions with HCC staff, other parties, and virtually all of that work has been the subject of technical reporting by Perry's advisors and then independent peer reviews by the council. So we've got a pretty robust outcome to be where we're at the moment. And I think that work is highly relevant to the SHA in terms of demonstrating suitability of the land and the likely issues that will have to be dealt with by the resource consent and the conditions in the future. So just briefly summarising some of those key ones, geotechnical and natural hazards. So I can confirm the development can be designed to avoid any Waikato riverbank hazard areas, so those are just the areas along the riverbank itself, and the majority of that is going to be vested in Esplanade Reserve as a result of this development. The only gully hazard area is actually an existing stormwater treatment area in the base of a gully on the site. It's going to be retained and upgraded as part of the stormwater treatment for future residential development. So preliminary geotechnical assessments have been undertaken and they've been peer reviewed. And there's there's agreement in principle that any residual issues can be dealt with through detailed design at consenting stage. There's always a chicken and egg as to how far you go to prove that the nature of the development can take place. But at this stage, there's sufficient work being done in that area to demonstrate that the land is suitable for residential. Archaeological sites. So there are 2 archaeological sites. One of them is actually going to be preserved. It's actually close to the riverbank, so it can be included in the Esplanade Reserve. And only one, which has already been largely destroyed by quarrying and expressway construction, will actually be affected. Traffic impacts. There's been some discussion about traffic impacts, and again, these will be dealt with through the resource consent process. Preliminary assessments have identified intersections and roads that will be impacted by a residential development of this type. Staged upgrading will follow in the usual way as part of the subsequent qualifying development consent process of consent. NZTA is generally actively involved in SHA consents in places where SHAs have been rolled out, such as Auckland, Queenstown and Tauranga, and they will be in this one as well, and there have already been a number of discussions and meetings with them in relation to traffic issues. So I guess just very briefly, there are two particular areas which are directly affected by traffic from this SHA. One is Hutchinson Road itself, which will need to be upgraded to collector road standard. The other one is the Hutchinson Road, Te Rapa Road roundabout, which will need to be upgraded as well. And there's an open question still as to what form that upgrade takes. It'll either be an enhancement of the roundabout with potentially some additional lanes, or a complete change to a traffic light controlled intersection. So that's accepted that those are the 2 technical outcomes. Which one is chosen will depend on more detailed work to be done. The balance of the traffic modelling identifies that traffic effects, as you'd expect, are spread across the roading network quite a lot, with minor effects on various intersections along Te Rapa Road in particular, and those will need to be considered further as part of the resource consent process. In terms of public transport, there are some good options for public transport connections, and there have been discussions with the Regional Council about this as well. The site is already on the Huntly-Hamilton bus route with bus stops on Te Rapa Road just adjacent to the service centre. Potentially looking at shifting those bus stops initially so they're as close as the residential area, in which case it would simply act as the stop on the Huntly-Hamilton route as it does at the moment. But the housing development is designed to allow for a bus loop through the site, so that in time, hopefully the demand will be such that the bus routes will be able to go through the site and actually stop within the development as well. Obviously, there's some potential for rail transport connections as well, dependent on whether an Auckland-Hamilton commuter link is developed, but Horatu has site rail and land adjacent to the North Island main trunk line, which could be an option for a station in the future. Remembering that Horatu itself is quite a significant village with increasing employment occurring there as well. Cycling and walking options, there are several options that have emerged out of the work to be done to date, and so they include upgrading the existing Te Awa River Ride through from the site down to Te Rapa. A second option would be upgrading the shared path, which follows the Te Rapa section of the Waikato Expressway, a fair way into towards Te Rapa as well, although there are gaps in it. And lastly, an option of upgrading Te Rapa Road to include a cycling facility. Again, those 3 options have been the subject of discussion. It'd be fair to say there's no current favourite. There is a favourite from Perry's point of view, that's upgrading the Te Awa River Ride, but technically there are, all of those options stack up. Lastly, in terms of infrastructure, the site's already serviced for water and wastewater infrastructure and stormwater discharge. So there is a comprehensive stormwater discharge consent already in place, which was obtained prior to the initial development of the service centre that's taken place. And similarly, water and wastewater services were extended to the site at that time. So there is an existing investment in bulk infrastructure, which this housing development can take advantage of. So attachment 7 to the staff report, a good summary of reverse sensitivity issues. In my view, the site's not particularly difficult when an objective reverse sensitivity effects-based assessment is carried out. It actually has 1.2 kilometres of river frontage and 1.3 kilometres of expressway Te Rapa Road frontage. So it's actually a triangle. The third frontage is on Hutchinson Road, and on that side it has 650 metres of frontage adjacent to potential industrial development across the road. There is a separation distance of 350 metres from Fonterra's site boundary that's able to be readily achieved. So a buffer distance of this or a greater distance as assessed through the consenting stage as appropriate can be included in a qualifying development consent conditions, along with other mitigation measures such as acoustic treatment, which has been discussed already, building orientation, design, and also landscape screening. So there's a lot of methods that are commonly used to mitigate reverse sensitivity effects. Cool stores, factories and similar industrial uses close to medium and high density residential areas are commonplace in larger cities across both New Zealand and overseas. Port of Tauranga and its associated industrial areas located beside residential areas in Mount Maunganui are a close by example. So these uses can occur on a 24-hour basis. Land use conflicts can and will be mitigated and managed through measures such as noise buffers, as are already in place, distance and good design of the housing developments proposed. Locational and strategy issues have been extensively assessed in the reports prepared for Perry's and also in the staff report, and Perry's considers Council has ample evidence it can rely on with confidence to support a decision to recommend Te Awa Lakes as an SHA area.
Thank you, John. Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm just thinking with Council as kaitiaki of our community, just thinking it might change our program a little and ask if Simon can actually address the team at the moment. We've had over 40 odd consultants involved in the overall process with Perry, other people reviewing this project. I think there's technical information there that you can either read yourself and everyone will present in their way, but I think it's important that the group hears from Simon in regard to where he sees the vision generally and how he feels about the development. So if it's all right with you, Mr. Mayor, we do that.
Welcome, Simon.
Thank you, Your Worship, and tēnā koutou. Good morning, everyone. I've been taking a few notes this morning, so I'm going to ad-lib a little bit just on the basis of some submissions that have been made. So thanks firstly for the opportunity. We appreciate the speakers today, and particularly the mana whenua who have come in force in difficult circumstances. Our partnership, of course, goes way back to Sir Robert's days and more recently with the cycleway. There's been mention of the process being fast-tracked, and of course 641 pages would probably conflict with that. It's a bit of a war and peace novel of technical evidence and detail, and as you heard from Lali, there are over 40 consultants involved. And I'd just like to thank at this moment council staff and councillors for the time. I know it's a lot of extra load on yourselves in terms of processing something like this. We've heard a lot of technical arguments throughout the months that have gone past, so I just want to focus on a couple of points. One is on the three submissions, and the first one is Waikato Regional Council. I guess I was a little disappointed that their submission neglects to mention the river. And of course, we've called it Te Awa Lakes for a reason, being adjacent to the river. And of course, Environment Waikato, as they were called for many years, have a focus or a goal or a vision around protecting the river and enhancing the river. So I guess to submit on the basis of traffic and town planning, etc. is fine, but I think it's an unfortunate omission. And I do wonder if it does reflect the organisation's overall view. As a submitter, I'm a shareholder actually of Open Country Dairy, have been for over a decade, and I was a director of Open Country Dairy for some time. It's a role I didn't especially enjoy, and I found them to be a relatively inwardly focused organisation with a highly commercial focus. but they did lack a community conscience, and that was a bit of a struggle for me personally. They say that the site is inappropriate and obviously have concerns over reverse sensitivity. They neglected to mention that AFCO is in fact surrounded by residential community, over 300 households, and I was one of those for around 20 years. Waikato District have recently rezoned many blocks, including 10 acres right next to the AFCO ponds, only 100 metres away. And our own River Terraces block further along towards Ngarawahia, 150 homes has also recently been rezoned as part of Variation 17. So I think there is plenty of precedent there in terms of residential and industrial activity. They refer to our site being 200 metres away, but in fact we're about 1 kilometre from their effluent ponds, and we've got an expressway in between, so quite some distance. Of course, AFCO refused to let us through with our cycleway, the only landowner in 9 years of over 100 landowners that we consulted with. And that was disappointing, but fortunately and ironically, they gave us the bridge. And of course, that's been very successful. We get over 700 cyclists a week. So we'd like to thank AFCO for that contribution. In terms of Fonterra, I have the utmost respect for Fonterra as an organisation, and they're a very important part of our region. They submit that it's in the wrong location, and of course Mr Crisp showed a slide, I think it was dated 1971, of the site. Of course it's now 2018, so quite some time since 1971, and there are about 50 houses within 1 kilometre of the Fonterra factory. In fact, Rototuna is expanding rapidly. The Meadows development also is closer than parts of our Te Awa site, many hundreds of homes. So there is plenty of precedent residential and the Fonterra factory to live, I guess, in the same precinct harmoniously. And we've got Morrinsville, Te Amutu, Waharoa, many plants where Fonterra operate, bordered on or surrounded really by residential communities. So again, these activities can coexist, bearing in mind we're 600 metres away from their boundary. And we purchased 12 hectares within the buffer zone, and we've been working on a number of alternatives, ways of, I guess, working with Fonterra in terms of mitigating any concerns that they have. We're not here to discuss that precinct today, but there is a real opportunity to create tourism, retail, commercial and recreational assets and facilities in conjunction with Fonterra, and we've presented to them on a number of occasions regarding that opportunity, and we look forward to working with them. Finally, I guess Fonterra brings me to the point around the river. We've called it Te Awa Lakes for a reason, and that's because we do border the river. And if you look at, and I sort of printed this off this morning, a map, I've got a few copies. If you look at the Hamilton City, we've got 40 kilometres that stretch either side of the river in terms of the city boundaries. Less than 2% of it, in fact probably about 1 to 1.5%, is the Fonterra factory. The bulk of the rest of it is either the CBD, which is of course our commercial hub, or residential activity or amenity space. We're talking about parks, golf courses, cycleways. In fact, the Fonterra factory is an outlier rather than, I suppose, the norm. And what we are proposing here with Te Awa Lakes is really not an outlier at all, but very consistent with the development of the city where residential activities border the river. And we've heard a lot from iwi and others on that. So I guess our contention would be, does it really make sense, I guess, to perpetuate what we would say is an outlier in terms of having an industrial activity next to the river? So let's not compound what might have been something that happened in the 70s. Let's move forward and enhance our community. Thank you very much. Happy to take questions.
Okay, so we're taking questions at 1 minute per person, so to get through everybody. So Paula, you may start.
Crikey, so I'll on paragraph 2, John, of your handout, please, talking about the purpose of the HASHA and how it's elevated above the purpose of the RMA. I'm just interested in that. The first time I've heard it expressed that way, that it's elevated over the RMA. So if you could talk me through that. And the Hasha isn't just there for rezoning land, though, is it? There's a lot of other cut-throughs that the Hasha provides besides potentially doing something on a block of land that was zoned for something else. Can you just talk me through those two things, please?
Yeah, so in terms of providing some cut-through, yes, it does, and it can apply to any land. I guess the point I'm making here is that typically what's happened in New Zealand is that SHAs have very often been applied to out-of-zone land, and Hamilton is actually an example because I think the only SHA that's on residential zone land would be Jepson Place. All the others are out of zone, if you like. So it does provide cut-through, but I guess the maximum cut-through you get is because of the change in land use that you can secure through that. So I think that's really the point I was making. So in terms of the, I guess the hierarchy of documentation, so if you, in terms of the Hasha Act, when you're considering a resource consent, it has specific criteria that you have to consider. And number 1 is the purpose of the Act. Numbers 2 and 3 from memory are RMA Part 2, and then number 3, the district plan.
So that's where you say that the resource consent will happen. So a lot of the sort of evidence, if you like, it feels like evidence that we've been provided.
Excuse me, Councillor, we have other people waiting and you're 2 minutes already, and I think the question was very well answered. So I'll move on to Councillor Gary. One question, please, Gary.
Thank you. And it relates to your paragraph 3. You talk about the site will not be available for strategic industrial purposes for the foreseeable future. Now, that zoning was in our district plan, our current district plan, which went through millions of dollars worth of processes and thousands of hours worth of consultation and voluminous, whatever that word is, evidence and whatnot. You're now just out of this paragraph saying, yeah. There's this much weight saying it's not. It's there for district plan. It's been through everything. That much saying it's not for the foreseeable future.
We got it
Does
wrong.
that stack up?
We got it wrong.
The district plan's wrong?
Yep. Essentially, it is because plan at the time, you've got to remember, it's a very high level document, and it's allocating broad land uses. In Te Rapa North, a huge amount of land was allocated to deferred industrial, not active industrial. So deferred industrial is a way of allocating land for its likely future without really delving into the detail of whether it's suitable for that at the time. So it was kind of a gap filler, if you like, from that point of view. So to my mind, it's not at all unusual to find, as you delve into it more deeply, that in fact not every site in that 230 hectares is going to be suitable. This is one of them. And I mean, it's the same from Perry's point of view. Perry, at the time, you know, hindsight's a great thing, that it would be okay for some form of industrial use. That's turned out to not be the case. And so it's not unusual to now have to go and revisit it and say, what is the appropriate use of that land?
Perhaps just adding to that, back in the 90s, we saw a residential development on that land, but the planners of the day were very, I guess, vociferous about that corridor, and so we backed off. But we certainly initially always saw that as residential, consistent with the rest of the city.
Councillor
consistent with the rest of the city.
Andrew, thank you very much. From AFCO this morning, who said that their wastewater treatment plant is 500 metres from the boundary of this development. What activity are you planning close to the boundary?
Yes, I think as Simon mentioned, I don't think that's correct actually. My recollection is that the wastewater treatment plant, which is opposite AFCO itself is over 1.2 kilometres away from the boundary of Te Awa Lakes. So I would estimate that the ponds are around about 1 kilometre away. And so it's, a very significant distance away.
Okay, thank you.
Deputy Mayor Martin, just one question, please, Martin.
Around the issues of reverse sensitivity, presumably it's a given in terms of design of buildings, double glazing, insulation. Do you have anything to add to that? I mean, obviously your next, I mean, I don't know if you're different to other areas actually, residentially.
Yeah,
Just how you're going to handle that.
Yes, so some specific thinking around that in terms of proximity to the expressway.
Yeah.
So there are already rules in Hamilton City's district plan about treatment acoustic houses within 100 metres of the expressway. So that's already built into the thinking. At the moment, that's really going to be considered in more detail later with the resource consent aspect of it, because in terms of Fonterra, they've got their own noise contour that they have to operate within, and that is well outside the site. So we don't expect there to be any noise issues in relation to Fonterra, but certainly in terms of the expressway, yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for your presentation. We'll stop for lunch and we'll reconvene at 1:30. So I need a bit of a... Are you going to the bathroom and come back?
I'll go get that, Murray, gentlemen.
Thank you.